Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 776, The Long Night Story. Everyone's eyes fell on Dr. Marwin. After all, he was the most knowledgeable person present. Since the Oath of Allegiance, thousands of years after the war between the ancestors and the children of the forest ended, a winter that lasted for a generation has descended upon the entire world. The cold world is dark and gloomy. People grow up in the cold winter and die in the cold winter. They have never seen the arrival of spring in their lives. Even the king and the castle and the humblest servants were not spared, and they all froze to death in the long winter. Mothers killed their children so that they would not suffer from the pain of being born. They cried loudly, but their tears froze on their cheeks. Dr. Marwin's voice was low, and his palm holding the thick book trembled slightly. This was a story passed down by the ancestors through symbols and by word of mouth of the ancient families. The old lady in Winterfell once told the children of the Stark family in this way. However, the history of mankind today was written after the Andals arrived in Westeros. Therefore, many of the histories about the Dawn Age, the Heroic Age, and the Long Night were all supplemented by scholars thousands of years later. Some doctors and scholars in the Citadel did not believe in the existence of such things as the Long Night. They thought the story of the Long Night was too absurd. How could there be a night that lasted for decades? This did not conform to the laws of astrology at all. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, unchanged from ancient times. If there really was a night that lasted for decades, was it because the sun was hiding in the sea and didn't want to come out? Or was it blocked by something? For the scholars' cognition of this world, most of them still believed that the world was a flat surface. Even a doctor in the history of the Citadel, Dr. Thomas, speculated in his book Lies of the Ancients that the so-called White Walkers were just a tribe of ancestors, the ancestors of today's worldlings, and the Long Night was just an extremely long winter. When this cold winter came, they were forced to move south, triggering a series of wars. He believed that the brutal acts of these White Walkers were fabricated by the Stark family and the Night's Watch. They just wanted to exaggerate their historical identity, claiming to be the savior of mankind, and cover up that they benefited from this battle for territory. Unfortunately, Dr. Thomas did not live to this day, otherwise he would be slapped in the face. He would not only see the White Walkers, but also see the coming of the Long Night. In the Emperor's bedroom and Meager's tower in the Red Castle, everyone present fell into silence after hearing the words of Grand Maester Dr. Marwin. A winter that lasts for a generation? What a joke. Everyone felt cold from head to heel. However, a winter that lasts for a generation is not the most terrible thing. The most terrible thing is the darkness that lasts for a generation. If it was just cold, the tenacious humans who survived might be able to hold on by gritting their teeth, or at most run south to the summer islands. And the darkness that lasts for a generation. What to eat at that time? I'm afraid I don't know how many people will starve to death. I say, everyone, we shouldn't be in a daze here. At this time, the Emperor's advisor, the little devil Tyrion Lannister, was the first to react. His small body was the most inconspicuous among the crowd, and even standing at the table, it was difficult to find where he went. What should we do? However, Tyrion was indeed the first among the ministers present to regain his sanity, and then asked a very constructive question. What should we do? If the Long Night really comes, we must do something. For this country, for the people of this country, and also for our own lives. Tyrion looked at the people present, his eyes swept across their cheeks, then shrugged his shoulders, and tried to make a joke. He wanted to liven up the atmosphere, but failed because his own voice was a little dry. For example, we can build some underground fortresses that can keep out the cold, fill them with enough food to last for many years, and then hide ourselves in them. As for the people on the ground, they can only wish for the best, since they already know that the Long Night is coming, and this Long Night may last for decades. Then even a little bit of food cannot be wasted at this time, because your kindness may make you fall at the last moment before dawn. And since it is a long night, giving them a little food is not enough for ordinary people to survive the winter. And for another example, is Westeros the only one that has lost the sun? Is there sunshine somewhere else? Tyrion asked again, and this time he set his eyes on Grand Maester Dr. Marwyn and Law Minister Oberyn. If there is still sunshine somewhere else, we can lead our army to conquer that land, and then migrate our people there to survive this disaster. Tyrion raised his fist high and clenched it tightly, as if to symbolize strength. There was a reason why he asked these two people, because one of them was a learned doctor who should know more about the Long Night, and the other was a general who was good at fighting. If there were really other places in the world that still had sunshine, he believed that His Majesty the Emperor would definitely conquer them at all costs and seize that land. Unfortunately, he looked at Prince Dawn with expectation, but the other shook his head slightly. I don't know if there is sunshine in other parts of the world now, but if the Long Night is really coming. Oberyn's voice was a little cold, and he took a deep breath. According to the legend of the Rhoynar, the mother river of the Rhoynar will disappear in the Long Night. Oberyn's words made the hope that had just ignited in the hearts of everyone present disappear again, because the legend of the Long Night proved that they also appeared on the continent of Essos at that time. Yes, about 8,000 years ago, the Long Night fell simultaneously all over the world, and Dr. Marwyn, who was anxiously flipping through books, spoke in a tired voice at this moment. He was flipping through the history of the Dawn Age and the Heroic Age. Fortunately, the Red Keep, as the imperial palace of the Empire, had enough books and records about the Long Night, appeared in the history of the Heroic Age. East of the Skeleton Mountains, the same story happened in Yeti. The sun disappeared, and darkness forever enveloped the earth. The Yi people believed that the Long Night was caused by the blood chaos of the Bloodstone Emperor. He killed his sister, the Amethyst Queen, and usurped the throne of the Dawn Kingdom. And the Bloodstone Emperor betrayed the true god, the Daughter of Light, and the Night Lion, and instead worshipped a mysterious black stone that fell from the sky. Therefore, the Night Lion let the Long Night come to punish mankind. However, in another book called An Overview of the Jade Sea, there is a different legend about Yeti. It is said that the sun hid because it was ashamed of something that no one knew, and finally a woman with a monkey's tail reversed the disaster. The story of the Long Night happened simultaneously in every corner of the world. Our ancestors had nowhere to hide and could only deal with it themselves. Dr. Marwyn closed the book, sighed and said, "This is a crisis for all mankind." Chapter 777 Iban. What bad luck, why do I see you today? It's like stepping on a pile of dog shit. In the brightly lit tavern, a man wearing boiled leather armor inlaid with iron plates and holding a double-edged prisoner of war at his side, said in a rough voice. He also held a leg of lamb in his hand and then opened his mouth wide to reveal a row of crooked square teeth, tore off a piece of meat directly, and chewed hard. On the other side, an Iban plunderer who was also burly and short, holding an axe in one hand and a long-haired round shield in the other hand, sat next to him directly and retorted in an unceremonious tone. "Fuck you, Gron. I stepped on dog shit when I saw you. This is Iban, an island country located in the polar sea north of the Essos continent. The largest island of Iban is Iban Island, an island covered with forests and mountains. The largest cities on it are the capital Iban Port and Iban Nor City. There are many small islands scattered in the Whale Bay in the south of Iban Island. To the southeast of Iban Island is a medium-sized mountainous island, Far Iban Island, on which the city of Iban Sam is built. The Iban people are burly, short, fat, and hairy. Both men and women seem to have not evolved completely, with abnormally broad chest muscles and shoulders. Moreover, the Iban people have a very obvious reproductive isolation from other races in this world. If Westeros or people from other continents make Iban women pregnant, the result will inevitably be deformed or stillborn. Similarly, if Iban men make women from Westeros or other continents pregnant, they often have deformed or natural miscarriages, just like mules. And the Iban people have their own unique way of greeting. Oh, fuck. Why are you all here? To join in the fun. Do I have wedding wine here? The Iban warrior named Goran took a sip of the strong liquor in the wooden cup next to him, took a bite of the wool, and looked at his companion sitting in front of him and said dissatisfiedly, "What? Someone was here just now." However, the Iban man with messy yellow hair holding an axe and a shield did not seem to hear Goran's dissatisfaction. Instead, he sat opposite him openly, put down his weapons and shield, took out a knife, cut a piece of meat from Goran's leg of lamb, put it in his mouth and asked, "Chos, damn Togjos." And Goran did not hide it, but spoke directly. This Togjos was a plunderer from Iban Island. He was once a member of the warriors group, which was also called the Blood Troop. Their leader was called Waghead, a Kohaman. It is said that many years ago they went to Westeros to make a fortune, and then were beaten by a dragon. The leader of the warriors group died on the spot, so they scattered like birds and beasts. From then on, the warriors group was disbanded, and the Iban man Togjos also returned to his hometown. After Togjos returned to Iban, he joined another mercenary group, which happened to be the mortal enemy of Goran and others. Because of this, the two of them couldn't stand each other, and had some conflicts in the tavern just now. But if Goran said so, Togjos was a deserter of the warriors. He also found an excuse. What, was he beaten by a dragon? This is so funny that it can make people laugh. Are dragons so common? And why would the dragons attack them for nothing? This is just like using a cannon to hit a mosquito. However, at this moment, a roar suddenly came from outside the tavern, but it was not very loud. It penetrated the white wind and snow, as if it came from a very far place. If you don't listen carefully, you won't hear it at all, let alone in the noisy and messy tavern. Iban is now also in an eternal night, dark and dark. However, as the Shadow Council of the rulers of Iban, they also responded quickly. They stabilized the local situation, and did not let the riots continue to expand. Now people don't know what happened. Why did the sun disappear? Smart people know to quietly hoard food, but most people have to go on with their lives. What else can they do without the sun? They can only continue to eat and drink. Even if the end of the world is imminent, they have to struggle. They can't just commit suicide in vain. However, the faint roar from the outside world continued. At first, no one cared. Perhaps it was too far away. It sounded like the whistling sound of the cold wind outside the tavern drilling through the cracks in the door. But as the sound became closer and closer, penetrating the wind and snow, and ringing in the sky of Ibanport, some of the people sitting in the tavern seemed to react, and heard something unusual. Iban is roughly the same latitude as the ancient tombs in the north. But when the long night fell, it suddenly snowed, and now it is still snowing outside. Goran, who was chewing the leg of lamb, was the first to react. He stopped what he was doing and asked, "Wait, did you hear it?" Then Goran held his leg of lamb in one hand, frowned, and listened. After he heard it clearly, his face suddenly changed. He quickly put down the lamb leg in his hand, and picked up the double-edged battle axe and long-haired round shield. The many Iban people in the tavern did not need him to remind them at this moment. They all reacted. What's going on? What's the sound? Everyone in the tavern in Ibanport stood up suddenly and grabbed their weapons. Dong 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 dong, then the alarm bell of Ibanport was heard. This is the bell that will only sound when foreign enemies invade. The Iban people are brave and all the people are soldiers. Therefore, when facing an invasion, they will ring the bell to call on all Iban warriors, both men and women, to take up their weapons and resist the enemy's invasion. Who invaded Iban? The Wooden Man of Ifovlan, or the Dothraki? The two major forces closest to Iban are the Dothraki and the legendary forest walkers of the kingdom of Ifovlan. They live in the forest, with only one city called Vesle. It is said that the Ifoviran people master forbidden magic. Although they are close neighbors of the Dothraki people, the Prairie Knights never dare to provoke them, but stay away from them. However, the Ibanese in the tavern are all confused, because theoretically, the Dothraki people are afraid of the sea, and will never cross the sea to attack the Ibanese. On the other side, the neighboring wood people of the kingdom of Ivoviran, although they are not peace-loving, they will kill outsiders without mercy when they break in, but the wood people have never left the forest. Chapter 778 Fall. It can't be lawless, right? Someone asked tentatively. Ha 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 ha. The tavern was filled with laughter, and the atmosphere relaxed a lot. Although Lawless is one of the 9 free trade cities, its overall strength is the weakest. It is the smallest, poorest, least populated and most backward city-state. Even Lawless military strength is only slightly stronger than that of Pentus, which signed the humiliating treaty. The Ibanese whalers can run rampant in the waters of Lawless, and the Lawless dare not say a word. How could they be so bold as to invade Iban now? Could it be some lost pirates? Someone spoke to mediate the atmosphere, and the tense atmosphere in the tavern dissipated immediately. Humph. It seems that this is really possible. When Goran heard this, he relaxed his brows and shrugged slightly. Occasionally, some pirates who got lost on Iban Island would also cause local alarms, and then he put down his axe and shield. However, at this moment, everything happened too fast and caught people off guard. Boom. The roof of the tavern collapsed with a sudden explosion. Everyone in the tavern hadn't reacted yet, and time seemed to have stopped. Goran had just sat down, and when he heard the sound, he raised his head, and then he saw the most dazzling and brilliant ice blue flame in sight, surging down along with the broken roof. The brave and fierce Iban plunderer didn't even have time to show a look of fear in his eyes, and was completely enveloped by the ice blue flame. A huge ice dragon that covered the sky and the sun came from the vast trembling sea north of Iban Island. It suddenly appeared above Iban port in the wind and snow, and then attacked the port city. The ice dragon's body was a little broken, and in some places you could even see exposed bones, but these bones were shining like crystals. It hovered over the Iban port, its huge body hidden by the wind and snow, and it kept roaring. The eyes of this ice dragon were also burning with ice blue flames. The huge ice dragon kept hovering over the Iban port, occasionally swooping down and spewing dragon breath, while the port city on the ground was trapped in an ice blue sea of fire. All humans who came into contact with this ice blue flame would instantly feel like being electrocuted, and all their vitality would be taken away in an instant, and they would fall to the ground. They were all frozen to death. However, within a few breaths, these corpses that had just fallen to the ground and had no vitality would once again climb up. But this time, their eyes turned into an ice blue color like this flame, and they would not recognize any relatives, even friends, relatives, lovers, etc. Gron. Give me a hand. The ice dragon's dragon breath destroyed the tavern, and another Iban mercenary survived by hiding under the table. Then when he struggled to climb out of the ruins, he saw his friend, the one who had just been chatting and laughing with him, staring at him blankly with his ice blue eyes. Hey, what's wrong with your eyes? Another Iban mercenary seemed to have noticed something wrong, and asked with a little confusion. Then he saw the cold-faced Goran in front of him, and his eyes gradually changed. Goran? Goran. Ah. Then a shrill scream rang out in the ruins of the tavern. Father and son. The grey-haired old father was thrown to the ground, and bitten madly by his son. Even his screams became weak, and he just kept crying. Husband and wife. The body of the wife on his back suddenly came back to life, and opened a pair of ice blue eyes, then bit her husband's neck fiercely. The husband fell off his back in pain, and the wife with ice blue eyes was like a hungry wild dog that smelled the smell of meat. She let out a terrifying howl, and pounced on her husband again. The man holding the axe was helpless. He covered his neck, which was still bleeding, with one hand, and roared in despair. Ah. He swung the axe in his hand and chopped off his wife's head with tears. But his wife's head, which fell to the ground, continued to roar, as if she wanted to bite him. However, such tragedies continued to occur in Iban port. The people who died under the dragon's breath got up again and killed others, and these people who were killed got up again after a while and killed more people. In this cycle, the entire port city, which was once the most prosperous in Iban, turned into a purgatory on Earth. A large number of Iban people turned into corpse ghosts and became part of the army of death. A small number of Iban warriors were struggling to resist. Kill. Hold on. In the sky of Iban port, the huge ice dragon hidden in the wind and snow had stopped spewing dragon flames at some point. The reason was simple. Because there was no need for the ice dragon to continue attacking now. The surging army of death alone was enough to make this human city fall. Any resistance at this time was futile. Where do these monsters come from? The Iban warriors' desperate counterattacks, bloodshed, and desperate roars all seemed like a performance to please a certain pale ghost. The ice dragon hovered over the Iban port, and a figure sat on its back. He was wearing a simple armor made of ice, with a stone sword on his back, quietly overlooking the gradually falling human city below, with a pair of eyes burning with ice blue flames. The power of death combined with the magic of the ice dragon actually produced a subtle effect. The breath of the ice dragon seemed invisible, taking away all life wherever it passed, and letting them revive again. Under the cover of the long night, the lights in Ibanport were gradually fading. The lights on the island here were all lit by whale oil, which was said to burn for a long time. However, in the end, the last ray of light disappeared on the hill. That was the headquarters of the Shadow Council of the Iban rulers, and the entire prosperous port city of the Iban capital was completely plunged into darkness. Even the last bit of resistance on the ground disappeared, and the whole city fell into silence. The figure riding the ice dragon in the air turned around and looked to the south. There was the Whale Bay, which separated Iban Island and Essos continent. To the south of the Whale Bay was the Iban people's new city Neuis, and the Forest Walker Kingdom of Iververum. Chapter 779, Golden Dynasty. Enshrouded in the darkness of the eternal night, a grey heron was soaring over this eastern wasteland, with a pair of sharp eyes constantly scanning the earth, as if looking for its prey in the dark night. Tap, tap, tap. On the ground, the noisy sound of horse hooves sounded. A team of cavalrymen dressed in oriental colors were slowly moving forward. They were lined with red battle robes, wearing chainmail, carrying bows and swords, wearing red cherry helmets on their heads, and holding blue battle flags and torches embroidered with gold edges in their hands. They seemed to be patrolling this land. However, at this moment, bang, the bowstrings in the patrol team suddenly burst out with a sound. Whoosh, a sharp arrow burning with flames crossed the night and directly pierced the head of a half-human half-beast creature covered with green scales all over its body, and also illuminated the darkness beyond the light of the torches in the distance. There were several similar-looking half-human half-beast monsters covered with green scales. They were looking at the patrolling cavalry with greedy and ferocious eyes. Then they let out strange howls and pounced on them. General. A cavalryman sitting on horseback holding a longbow in the patrol team frowned slightly, then turned his head and looked at their general. It was obvious that the arrow just now was shot by this cavalryman. His eyes were very sharp, and he could see the enemy's trajectory even in the dim night. Therefore, he just discovered that the monster was approaching quietly, and then he drew his bow and shot the other party directly. But he didn't expect that this monster was not acting alone. Not far away from him, there were several other monsters with green scales all over their bodies, forelimbs on the ground, and a pair of short wings on their backs, which could briefly hover in the air and glide. Yes, it's the Shrike. The leader of the patrol team, who was called General, was a middle-aged man with black hair, a black beard on his chin, and dark eyes. He also saw the group of green-scaled half-human half-beast monsters, and his eyes showed disgust and hatred. These damn monsters. They were the garrison of the ET Golden Dynasty stationed at the 5 forts. The 5 forts were located in the borderland northeast of the Golden Dynasty. There were 5 giant military fortresses that stretched from the southern end of the Blood Sea in the north to the northern foot of the Dawn Mountains in the south. They formed a curve, guarding the border of the Golden Dynasty, and defending against attacks from monsters in the Shrike Land and even the Grey Wasteland. The walls of the 5 forts were built of melted black stone bricks, reaching hundreds of feet in height, even as high as the Great Wall of Despair, and became a natural barrier that could never be conquered outside the Central Plains civilization. According to legend, the 5 fortresses, a miracle of human civilization, was not originally built to resist the Shrike Birdmen and the monsters in the Grey Wasteland. Because although the Shrike Birdmen have a pair of short wings on their backs, they can only glide for a short time at most, and it is impossible for them to fly to the magnificent city walls hundreds of meters high. Even the terrifying monsters in the Grey Wasteland would be beaten to a bloody pulp in front of the 5 fortresses. Therefore, the ancestors of the Yeti people did not need to go to great lengths to build such huge 5 fortresses to guard the border of the empire in order to fight against these inferior races that harassed the border. Therefore, in the ancient legends of the Yeti people, the origin of the 5 fortresses was earlier than the Golden Celestial Dynasty, but was ordered to be built by the second emperor, the Pearl Emperor, during the Dawn Kingdom period. He is the descendant of the Daughter of Light and the Night Lion, the eldest son and heir of the Emperor of Heaven. The Emperor of Heaven reigned for 10,000 years, until he ascended to the star. The Pearl Emperor ruled for more than 1,000 years, and then passed the throne to the Emerald Emperor. The Pearl Emperor believed that with the protective fortress of the 5 fortresses, the Night Lion and his demons could be kept away from the human world. Now, this patrol of cavalry is from the garrison stationed in the 5 fortresses of the Golden Dynasty. They are not only stationed in the fortress, but also occasionally send out elite scouts to patrol and hunt the Shrike birdmen who try to sneak around the 5 fortresses and enter the Middle-earth world in the monsters of the Grey Wasteland. Therefore, when this team of cavalry from the Golden Dynasty saw the Shrike birdmen, who were only legends to the outside world, they were not afraid at all. Instead, they drew their bows and arrows, and some drew their swords at their waists, and killed the monsters that pounced on them. Kill them. The general with a short black beard gave an order, and the rest of the Golden Dynasty cavalry did not hesitate. As if they had rehearsed it countless times, they pulled the reins in their hands, and the patrol cavalry instantly scattered like birds and beasts in all directions. The sound of horse hooves was chaotic and noisy, and the Shrike birdmen with scarlet eyes and green scales made strange roars, and pounced on them. The horses under the crotch of this team of Golden Celestial Empire cavalry had also seen big scenes. They often followed their masters to hunt these terrible monsters. If ordinary war horses had never seen such monsters, they might have been frightened and fled with their masters. However, these war horses were all strong, with slender bones and shiny hair under the light of torches. They were good horses at first glance. This kind of horse was bigger, sprinted faster, and had stronger impact force. Of course, there was a price, that is, the general endurance was not very good. They dispersed with their masters, and the cavalry on horseback also drew their bows and arrows. There were cavalry holding torches to illuminate them, and then the archers narrowed their eyes slightly. Bang, the bowstring burst out again, and a lightning-like arrow suddenly flew out of his hand. Then with a puff, the flying arrow quickly drilled into the eye socket of the howling Shrike birdman. Blood spurted out instantly, and the body fell to the ground. The patrolling cavalry of the Golden Dynasty used their skillful riding skills and scattered formations to confuse the attention of the bird monsters, making them lose focus and unable to concentrate on one target, and then they were defeated one by one. Bang, bang, bang. In the eternal night, sharp arrows flew out and reflected the cold light under the light of torches, ruthlessly harvesting the lives of the Shrike birdmen. Soon only the last few Shrike birdmen were left to escape, but at this time, they found that they had been surrounded by the cavalry of the Golden Dynasty in a scattered formation. They screamed in fear and threats, bluffing, as if trying to scare off the group of humans, but the knights on horseback had cold faces and were not moved at all. They all drew their swords at their waists. Charge, kill, puff puff puff. Then, the chaotic hooves of the horses crossed, trampling the soil polluted by blood, and the corpses of the Shrike birdmen fell to the ground. Chapter 785th Base. The last Shrike let out a desperate roar, and its eyes seemed to have human emotions. It watched its people being slaughtered but was helpless, and its eyes clearly conveyed anger. It spread its wings and let out a sharp roar, and pounced on the general among the human cavalry. But before it could pounce, a sharp spear pierced its chest. Puff, then the general of the Golden Dynasty pulled out the spear in his hand, and the body of the Shrike fell to the ground. The sole of the boot wiped the blood on the spear blade, and then raised his head and said, "Cut off their heads, and get the reward. Go back to the city. Open the city. Open the city." The cavalry who went out on patrol returned to the camp, and the trumpet sounded on the towering city head, and then the gate of the Golden City opened wide to welcome the return of the cavalry who had won the credit of beheading. The 5 forts stand in the northeast of the Golden Celestial Empire. The 5 military fortresses are called the 5 cities of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. The 5 cities are Fire City, Earth City, Gold City, Water City and Wood City from north to southeast. This team of patrol soldiers came from Gold City, which is also the most prominent fortress on the frontier of the Celestial Empire. It is located in the center of the 5 forts, and is located in a strategic location. The other 4 cities must cooperate with Gold City to defend against monsters, and protect the Middle-earth from being invaded by monsters. Captain Zoo. Thank you for your hard work. The middle-aged general with a short black beard who had just led 100 cavalry patrols to capture 18 heads of Shrike birdmen and made great contributions was walking towards the general's mansion in the Golden City after turning over and getting off his horse. Yeah. The general surnamed Zoo just nodded and dealt with the greetings around him, but his pace did not slow down at all. His surname is Zhu and his name is Xining. In fact, Zhu Xining is not the general in the mouths of his subordinates. In the Golden Celestial Empire, the title of general is a very high military rank. It is often a high-ranking general who guards a place, or is qualified to lead an army alone. The general in the mouth of the subordinates is just a compliment or a customary title for a lower-level military officer, to address a higher-level military officer. There is no particularly strict decree in the Celestial Empire Army to prohibit the arbitrary use of general, so everyone calls it that. Zhu Ying is actually a lieutenant in Jincheng. The military position of a lieutenant is not high or low, second only to the general. He can lead a certain type of army under the general, such as infantry or cavalry, and he is the scout lieutenant of Jincheng. Because of his superior martial arts, excellent horsemanship, and amazing spearmanship, he can go deep into the land of shrikes or even the Grey Wasteland to hunt these monsters, and then retreat unscathed. Therefore, this lieutenant surnamed Zhu has a high prestige among the soldiers of Jincheng, and is admired and loved by the soldiers. Lieutenant Zhu. However, when Zhu Xining arrived at the general's mansion, he found that the general of Jincheng was not in his mansion. Where did the general go? The middle-aged lieutenant with a short black beard frowned slightly, and then asked in a serious voice. The guard on duty at the general's mansion did not hide it, and said respectfully, Lieutenant Zhu, the general went to the brothel. Brotherhood. Brothels are brothels. The middle-aged lieutenant frowned even more tightly when he heard this, and it was obvious that his face was slightly unsettled. As a general, how can he linger on the long night and the war is ahead? Lieutenant, do you want me to take you to find the general? The soldier on duty at the general's mansion asked. No, thank you. I'll go find him myself. The middle-aged lieutenant's brows finally relaxed. General Jincheng was the commander-in-chief of the entire Jincheng appointed by the emperor. Even if he was a little dissatisfied, he dared not speak out. The 5 forts are 5 giant military fortresses, and also 5 cities. The scale of each city is very large. Each city is enough to support tens of thousands of soldiers who can fight in battle, and there are also many ordinary residents in the city. Although it is a military fortress to defend against monster invasions, it is also a city of the 5 celestial dynasties. Since it is a city with ordinary residents, it is inevitable that there are many non-military facilities in the city, such as flower buildings. However, the main job of the 5 fortresses is to defend against monster invasions, so it is like a hedgehog covered with spikes. There are also granaries and armories underground in the 5 fortresses, which store a large amount of food and military supplies such as knives, swords, bows, and crossbows, which are enough to support the 5 fortresses from being besieged for more than 10 years without falling from the inside. Because the 5 fortresses were built from the beginning, just like the Wall of Despair on the other side of the world, to resist the legendary enemy. Westeros is the White Walker, while the Golden Celestial Dynasty is the Demon of the Night Lion. However, the difference is that there are many countries in Westeros. From the Age of Heroes to now, hundreds of countries have been born, and Westeros has never been unified since Aegon's conquest. Therefore, people gradually immersed themselves in internal strife, and forgot the real enemy from the north. The Golden Dynasty of Yeti was born after the Long Night 8,000 years ago, and the gradually declining Dawn Kingdom collapsed in the Long Night. But the 5 fortresses ordered by the Pearl Emperor to be built thousands of years before the Long Night fell. The construction time of the 5 fortresses was much earlier than the Wall of Despair in Westeros, and it was also to resist terrible monsters different from the White Walkers. However, tens of thousands of years have passed, and the Yeti people have never forgotten their real enemies. Because although the current dynasty has changed 11 dynasties since the establishment of the Dawn Kingdom to the Golden Dynasty, it has maintained a unified situation from beginning to end. The Long Division will eventually unite, and the Long Unity will eventually separate. Today's Azure Dynasty is even more fragmented. The Emperor's orders do not leave Yedo, and there are many princes and nobles, and the vassal kings are fighting. In the north of the Celestial Empire, there is a general named Bo Xiang who has his own army and even wears a yellow robe and calls himself the Tezu of the Orange and Yellow Dynasty. He is in opposition to the current Emperor Buhei. Because of his bravery and good fighting skills and his familiarity with military books and strategies, General Bo Xiang has repeatedly sent troops deep into the grassland to attack the restless neighbor in the north. so he is also called Jujutsu's Hammer by the people and soldiers in the north of Yidi. However, even though the Azure dynasty has been torn apart, the country as a whole still maintains its overall framework. The elite garrison of the Celestial Empire stationed in the 5 fortresses only listen to orders, and not to the orders of the Yidu Emperor, because their mission is to guard the borders of the Celestial Empire and fight against the demons under the legendary Night Lion and the monsters in the Grey Wasteland, rather than to quell rebellion. If the troops are transferred back, the 5 fortresses will inevitably be empty. If the demons in the northeast break through the 5 fortresses from then on, the consequences will be disastrous. Therefore, in all dynasties, the garrison of the 5 fortresses has always had this attitude towards the Emperor's orders. From the beginning of its establishment 10,000 years ago to the present, the 5 fortresses have never fallen. Chapter 781, going straight to Huanglang. General. However, when the middle-aged lieutenant with short black beard found General Jincheng, he was indeed having fun in the brothel. 3 or 4 girls with half-revealed clothes were sitting around General Jincheng, and one of them even sat on his lap, holding a fruit plate in her hand, and feeding him food. The girl kissed the general's unshaven cheek lightly like a bird pecking, and then wanted to run away, but she didn't expect the general to hug her waist and kiss her hard with his rough lips. The general's behavior immediately caused a lot of flowers in the room. The middle-aged lieutenant with short black beard just stood outside the door, his face heavy, but he didn't say a word. However, at this time, General Jincheng, who was in loose clothes in the room, discovered the middle-aged lieutenant standing outside the door. Huh. Zuiying, when did you come? Then General Jincheng waved his hand slightly and drove away the girls around him. Since Lord Zhu is here, official business is important. You all should go down first. The girls pouted and complained when they heard the general's words. Then remember to come and see us again, of course. Of course. General Jincheng nodded with a smile on his face, and then turned around and asked when everyone had left, and only the middle-aged lieutenant and General Jincheng were left in the room. Lord Zhu, I was going to see you for something. What a coincidence. What do you want to see me for? I dare not call you Lord. Zuiying heard General Jincheng's words and spoke in a serious voice. In the Golden Dynasty, there are strict regulations for the title of Lord. Only those with the rank of general or above, or princes and nobles are qualified to be called Lord. Although the position of the lieutenant in the army is second only to the general, it is obviously not qualified. General, the long night has come, and there are more and more shrikes outside the city. There are even monsters from the Grey Wasteland. As the scout captain of the 5 Forts Golden City, Zuiying has recently led patrol cavalry to sweep the areas outside the Golden City every day to clean up these shrikes who cross the border to the border of the Celestial Empire. He has not encountered monsters from the Grey Wasteland, and these monsters are not as easy to deal with as the weak shrikes. The monsters in the Grey Wasteland can easily hunt down a team of 10 Golden Celestial Empire patrol cavalry, and such tragedies have occurred before. To deal with the monsters in the Grey Wasteland, more soldiers, as well as heavy weapons such as giant crossbows and chariots must be used to kill the enemy. Therefore, as a scout captain, Zuiying recently changed the size of the patrol team from the previous team of 10 people to 10 teams a day to a team of 100 people, sending 2 teams a day, constantly cleaning up the enemies who crossed the border, and protecting the safety of the people in the rear. We should join forces with the other 4 cities to send light cavalry deep into the land of the Shrike, attack Huanglang directly, and nip the danger in the bud. At the same time, this can also explore the true and false of the Grey Wasteland. If there is any unusual movement in the Grey Wasteland, our army can also make preparations in advance. He proposed that General Jincheng unite with the other 4 generals of the Fire City, Earth City, Wood City and Water City to form the 5 Forts Coalition to strike first and go directly into the land of the Shrike, catch the opponent off guard, and nip the danger in the bud. The land of the Shrike is also located on the continent of Essus. To its northeast is the Grey Wasteland and the Man-Eating Desert. To its west is the Sea of Blood. To its south is the 5 Forts. And to its southeast is the Great Dry Ditch. In the land of the Shrike there is also a legendary terrifying ruined city called Kadash. The defenders here in the 5 Forts believe that the attacks from the northeast are mostly caused by the Grey Wasteland and the unusual movement of Kadash. Because the Shrikes usually don't take the initiative to approach the border of the Celestial Empire. Although they are regarded as monsters by the Celestial Empire, they actually have a certain degree of wisdom and are a humanoid race with a low level of civilization. These shrikes know that they will be hunted by scouts if they approach the border of the Celestial Empire, but they still take great risks to migrate here, which means that there is a problem behind them. Someone or some kind of monster, or an ancient evil god, is driving these shrikes, forcing them to flee towards the border of the Celestial Empire as the vanguard of the attack on the 5 fortresses. And this city called Kadash is the core of the threat to the safety of the Celestial Empire's border. Legend has it that Kadash is the first city in the world, even older than time itself. Legend has it that evil festivals that cannot be described in words will be held in Kadash to satisfy the greed of crazy gods. Its terrifying reputation even scares the shrikes living in the south of this place. Zhuang's idea was to strike first and lead the Celestial Empire cavalry to attack Kadash unexpectedly, completely destroy this evil heart, burn the evil god statues in it, smash their altars, and then burn them all. However, Zhuang's worried words made the smile on the face of the General Jinsheng in front of him slowly fade. Well, because the history of Yeti has never been cut off, the advent of the Long Night is a major crisis recorded in the entire history of the Celestial Empire. The Yeti people recorded the entire process of the advent of the Long Night and the collapse of the Dawn Kingdom in detail, which is more detailed than the records in Westeros. Therefore, the Yeti people are more fully prepared for the crisis, not only in terms of material preparation, but also in psychological construction. However, the strategy proposed by Zhuang is not risky, it is simply dancing on the edge of a knife. If they are not careful, this cavalry of the 5 forts will die in vain, and no one will escape. After all, the biggest advantage of the Celestial Empire's defenders facing these demons and monsters is the 5-fort wall, and giving up the wall and taking the initiative to attack is indeed too risky. But correspondingly, once successful, the benefits are also great. Risks and crises often coexist, which depends on the attitude of the commander. General Jinsheng looked solemn, and after a moment's hesitation, he finally nodded. He did not agree, nor did he refuse directly. Zhuang, you are right. I will consider it. When the scout captain of Jinsheng heard that the general listened to his advice and said that he would consider it, he breathed a sigh of relief. However, before he could put his mind at ease, he heard his immediate superior change the subject and speak again. But for you, this matter can be put aside for the time being. The middle-aged captain with a short black beard was slightly stunned. Have you heard of the Valyrian Empire? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 782, Dothraki Invasion. In fact, for the people of the Golden Celestial Empire, they are the Celestial Empire in the Middle-earth. The people here do not pay much attention to the civilizations of the 4 directions, unless they invade their borders, or come to the door. If the enemy comes, they will fight back, and if the friend comes, they will entertain. For example, many years ago, there was a huge nomadic people from the Western world. They went through hardships and crossed the Skeleton Mountains from the Steel Road to the Land of the East. The Steel Road is located at the southern end of Khorazadzazk, ending at Kaakayana, connecting the Holy Mother Mountain, the Holy Land of the Dothraki, and the important commercial town where the Hammer of Jugosnay and the Golden Celestial Empire General Bozayang led his army to station. Therefore, when the Khal of the Khars riding the world's steed led more than 100,000 Dothraki roaring warriors through the Jugosnay plains and came to the border of the Golden Celestial Empire, the two sides immediately became tense, and the dark clouds of war shrouded the earth. This group of foreign troops suddenly appeared on the border and sent an oriental envoy. She wore a redwood lacquer mask and wrapped herself in a black cloak. Except for a pair of eyes, not even an inch of skin was exposed. This envoy from the east called herself Quay Lizard, who crossed the shadows and could speak fluently in the language of the Golden Celestial Empire. Crossing the Shadows is an obscure self-proclaimed name, referring to those who come from the Shadowland or Ashay next to the Shadowland. This Shadowbinder from Ashe met with General Bozayang to negotiate on behalf of the Dothraki. She asked the general to make way so that the Grassland Knights could cross the border of the Golden Celestial Empire to the Shadowland. She claimed that this could save the fate of the entire world. However, the request of the Quili was flatly rejected by General Bozayang. Although he looked down on the Emperor Buhei of Yidu who wanted to establish himself as king, he could not let such a large foreign cavalry enter the territory of the Celestial Empire. If so, he would become a sinner who would be infamous for thousands of years, regardless of whether it was a trick of the Jugsnake people. Therefore, the negotiations between the two sides broke down, and the dark clouds of war covered the earth. Kili returned to KLS reluctantly, and asked Mengo Cal to launch a war against the Golden Celestial Empire. The Dothraki crossed the Skeleton Mountains from the Steel Road, and continued to advance along the Great Sand Sea. This was the route that Kili and her other two Shadowbinder companions had planned, because this road can avoid crossing the Jugasnay Plain to the greatest extent, but instead travels along the edge. The steel road near the Great Sand Sea has a harsh environment and severe wind and sand, so the Jugasnay tribes rarely stationed near this area. Although the Jugasnay are also nomadic people, and their stature looks shorter and fatter than the Dothraki, the Jugasnay are also very fierce, and are known in the Eastern world for their cruelty and bellicosity. They went to war with almost all of their neighbors. The kingdom of Najil in the northeast was beaten by them to only one city, Neve. The kingdom of Jagwin, the descendants of Helkalan, and even once fought against Kaakayanea. The Great Golden Dynasty also fought a war with the Jugasnay. The young Emperor Aluobeo once led an army of 300,000 deep into the grasslands. He was not moved by the tribute, hostages, and oaths of submission of the Jugasnay people. His only goal was to eliminate the Jugasnay race. Unfortunately, he failed in the end. Therefore, the route formulated by the Kilishi tried to avoid conflicts with the Jugasnay people, and chose to bypass the edge. Fortunately, the Jugasnay people did not have a conflict with this passing Dothraki. Their Jahata chose the strategy of diverting the trouble to the east and let this huge Dothraki KLS pass by from this road to the border of the Golden Dynasty. However, when the Dothraki arrived at the border of the Golden Dynasty, there was no way around it. They had to pass through the border of the Golden Dynasty and cross this great empire to reach the Shadowland. The border of the empire is connected to the Blood Sea and cannot be crossed. If the Dothraki cannot pass through here, they must cross the Jugasnay Plain again and bypass the kingdom of Niger. However, the kingdom of Niger had been plundered by the Jugsnay for many years and was in decline, so it was not a big deal. However, the road after passing through the kingdom of Niger was not easy to travel. They had to cross the legendary man-eating desert and the vast grey wasteland. This was a place that was known to be a life forbidden zone just by the name. Mengo Cal unified all the Cals and gathered more than 100,000 Dothraki prairie cavalry. However, as an Ashe, Kili knew very well that if he wanted to force his way through the man-eating desert and the grey wasteland, it would probably not be enough to fill all the hundreds of thousands of Dothraki warriors. Even if he could get out, there would probably be very few left. Therefore, the route planned by Kili and the other two Shadowbinders was the only theoretically feasible way for the terrifying Eastern Hell Room. Unfortunately, they finally hit a snag here with General Bozayang of the Golden Dynasty. Then the arrogant Dothraki launched an attack on the border of the Golden Dynasty, and a long-lasting and fierce war broke out between the two sides. In the end, although the Dothraki were fierce, they still suffered a bloody defeat at the border of the Golden Celestial Empire. The tens of thousands of corpses were eaten by nearby vultures for several days, and the blood of the Dothraki also dyed the earth red. The Dothraki were frustrated and defeated by General Bozayang at the border of the Golden Celestial Empire, and then returned home in defeat, and fled back to the Great Grass Sea along the way they came. This was the most violent collision between the East and the West in recent years, and many people in the Golden Celestial Empire also learned about people on the other side of the world. Valyria. Zuang pondered for a moment, then nodded. I've heard a little about it. Valyria was once a great country, but it was destroyed. I heard that it was rebuilt in the West recently. The Golden Celestial Empire also has records about Valyria, which roughly says that it is similar to the Celestial Empire, raising exotic beasts that breathe fire and eat gold, and all countries look up to it like the capital, and it is actually a unified country. Moreover, the 4th emperor of the Huang dynasty, Bena, married a Valyrian noblewoman as one of his concubines, and kept a dragon in the palace. Well, very good. Very good. Just knowing that is good. General Jinsheng was standing in the flower building wearing only a white lining. He heard Zhu Ying's words, and touched his chin, and nodded with satisfaction. Especially when he recited a few ancient texts about Valyria, he applauded again and again. Zhu Ying, it just so happens that the Emperor's edict has been sent now, requesting the dispatch of a military officer to Valyria. I think you are very good. Chapter 783, Diplomatic Mission to Valyria. At the end of the distant world, a certain unknown Yadi captain was about to be sent to the west as an envoy to communicate ways to fight the long night together. Because in the eyes of the Golden Celestial Empire, only the revived Valyria Empire could fight side by side with it. Unfortunately, the power of the current Emperor Buhei was hollowed out, and he had nowhere to display his ambitions. He wanted to send civil officials and generals from the capital to the west, but now that the long night has come, it is extremely dangerous to sail on the sea in the dark, and no one in the court is willing to go. In desperation, the Emperor Buhei could only send a letter to Woolery, asking the garrison here to send a general to represent the Celestial Court to the west, to exchange what they have, and establish diplomatic relations with the powerful Valyria Empire, and to communicate ways to fight the long night together. Buhei was not actually an incompetent emperor. After he inherited the throne, the country was such a mess, and he had no chance to display his talents now. When the long night suddenly fell, the east was still in the dark. Many people woke up and found that it was not yet dawn, so they went back to sleep until they found something unusual and were terrified. When Emperor Buhei heard the news, he was surprised and happy. He regarded it as a great opportunity to wipe out the vassal states and restore the authority of the court. Therefore, he hoped to form an alliance with the Valyrian Empire to fight against the darkness together. The Emperor's edict, however, the innocent lieutenant showed a desperate look. Although the Emperor's power was trampled on and the country was in turmoil, the Emperor's edict was definitely not something that a small lieutenant like him could ignore. He was destined to embark on a fleet to the west, and even Zhu Ying had prepared to die in a foreign country. Because of the geographical location of the Golden Celestial Empire, the outside world is simply surrounded by demons and ghosts, and only the Golden Celestial Empire is a paradise. Therefore, the Yi people have always been highly vigilant about the outside world. He would rather rush into the grey wasteland alone to hunt monsters than go to the western world. But he was helpless. He knew that he had an important mission on his shoulders, so he had to bite the bullet and embark on this journey. After all, this concerns the expectations of the Emperor and the safety of more people. The country has a heavy responsibility on its shoulders, and it has to go. 3 days later, an envoy will come to pick you up. General Jinsheng also patted the scout captain on the shoulder, looked into his eyes and spoke sincerely. Old Zhu, see you later. On the other side, Westeros, the cold wind of winter is bleak. King's Landing was still midsummer before the long night fell, and there was no phenomenon of season change, let alone skipping autumn from midsummer to winter. However, since the long night fell, a deadly threat broke out after the sun disappeared. Now the most serious Maester will no longer have doubts about the issue of seasons, because after the sun disappeared, the temperature of the whole world began to slowly decline. Although the decline was not very fast at first, it fell off a cliff. Now snowflakes are floating in the sky above King's Landing, and Highgarden has also seen white snow that has not been seen for many years. However, Viserys, the backbone of the Emperor of the Empire, did not stay in King's Landing, nor in Highgarden, but rode his dragon to the wall. The Great Wall, which was once collapsed by the Horn of Winter blew by the king beyond the wall, still has a huge gap. Because with the current level of human construction, there is no way to plug such a big hole, not to mention that, even if it can be built, it will be useless. Without the protection of magic power, it is also a breakthrough for the attacks of the White Walkers. The Great Wall and many other architectural miracles in the world actually originated from that era of surging magic, but many of the magics at that time have been lost. Now, only a battlement has been built on the huge gap in the Great Wall, barely coping. As the other two dragon knights of the imperial royal family, Queen Rhaenys and Daenerys, the Duke of Dragonstone, they also rode their own dragons to the Great Wall. Rhaenys entrusted her son to her sister Aerion to take care of, and the other princess Daenerys seemed to let bygones be bygones, and took the initiative to put aside prejudices, and flew to the Great Wall to meet Viserys and Rhaenys. As for the remaining 5 dragons, Vhagar, Tyrex, Meryx, Syrinx, and the Silver, they were not brought here for the time being, because the situation was unclear. Vhagar and Tyrex were instructed by Viserys to follow their masters and protect their safety, as well as the safety of Highgarden. The 2 dragons might not obey Arion's orders, but it was enough that their masters, Diana, and heroes, would listen to Aerion. Viserys did not want his house to be raided while he was at the front. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. There was still heavy snow on the wall. Viserys went out for an inspection in the wind and snow, and then came back to shake off the snow on his body. The people sitting in the house hurriedly stood up and saluted. Today, the commander-in-chief of the Night's Watch is still the 997th Year Mormont. The old bear had a head full of white hair, a shaggy grey beard that hung down to his chest, and a pair of yellow eyes with crow's feet around them. Viserys' great uncle, Maester Aemon, was also among them, and there was also Eddard Stark, the former Duke of Winterfell, who had not been seen for a long time. He was also an old acquaintance. Lord Eddard did not always work as a soldier. With his ability and qualifications as well as the influence of the Stark family, he is now the chief coach of the Night's Watch, a deputy commander. The Night's Watch now has a size of about several thousand people, most of whom are prisoners who have been exiled to the border in recent years, and there are about 30,000 northern troops attached to the Night's Watch. These troops are not entirely composed of northerners, but are troops that have been continuously drawn and gathered in recent years through the decisions of the Imperial Council. The top leaders of the Empire never forgot that there was a powerful enemy waiting for them in the north. Viserys had been stockpiling food in an orderly manner since he unified Westeros and was ready for the cold winter, but he did not expect the long night to come. However, because they were fully prepared, when the long night came, the top leaders of the Imperial Council of the Empire were a little panicked, but generally they remained within control. It's not time to despair yet. How are the armies gathering? In the rebuilt Black Castle command post, Viserys, the commanders and generals of the Night's Watch, as well as Rhaenys and Daenerys gathered together. Although Rhaenys and Daenerys were female relatives, no one present looked down on each other. After all, the two of them were one of the main forces of the Empire's army, and they were dragon riders. On the other side, the affairs officer was reporting the news of the gathering of various armies. In the pre-war meeting, everyone held their breath and dared not speak, while Daenerys, who was standing aside, pursed her lips slightly and then secretly glanced at Viserys, who was sitting in the middle. Chapter 784 Countermeasures. The news of the fall of Iban has not yet reached Westeros. After all, Iban is extremely far away. Far Iban and the Bone Mountains are on the same longitude, even farther away than the Red Waste of Vys Dothrak. For the people of Westeros, Iban is almost the end of the world, just like the Summer Islands and Uet. After presiding over the highest level meeting of the Imperial Army, Viserys put on a dark fur cloak and returned to his bedroom. The wind and snow outside were still blowing, and her wife Rhaenys Targaryen wore a set of silver dragon scale armor, a heavy white fur shawl for warmth on her shoulders, and a black and red cloak. She has a graceful and tall figure, a pair of dark brown eyes, and a Valyrian steel sword dark sister on her waist. My husband. Viserys returned to his bedroom in the rebuilt Black Castle, and soon his wife Rhaenys also pushed the door and walked in. Rhaenys. Then the two hugged briefly and then separated. When the long night fell, Viserys was not in Highgarden. At that time, the whole world fell into chaos, and Highgarden was naturally no exception. From the royal family members, the Highgarden stewards to the ordinary maids and grooms, everyone in Highgarden was in a panic, thinking that the end of the world was coming. Viserys was in King's Landing at that time, and not in High Garden, so the little Queen Rhaenys took the initiative to stand up, and called her partner Eagle to protect High Garden, so that the back garden of the imperial family was free from chaos. Not long after that, almost all the nobles in the entire River Bay Crown territory sent their families to High Garden. Because they did not have a lord above their heads, they were directly under the crown, so when they encountered problems, they could only come to High Garden to ask for the protection of the royal family. Without Viserys' help, Rhaenys was also on her own. She guarded High Garden alone and let all the families of the nobles of the River Bay into the castle and properly settled them. Rhaenys' ability was unanimously praised by the families of the nobles of the River Bay, and they shouted the name of the Prince of Midsummer Hall. However, Daenerys also suddenly left High Garden before the long night fell, and Rhaenys didn't know where Daenerys was going. Although Daenerys' Rhaenys' aunt in terms of seniority, they should be sisters in terms of age. In fact, when Rhaenys was young, she even took care of the younger Daenerys, since she was a baby in swaddling clothes. Therefore, the relationship between the two is complicated. After growing up, Daenerys also has more ideas of her own, and Rhaenys can't control her now. After the long night fell, she was still a little worried about Daenerys' safety, but she was relieved when she saw that she also flew to the wall. However, Rhaenys didn't know what happened in King's Landing. Daenerys once quarreled with Viserys, and then flew to Dragonstone alone in anger. She just noticed that Daenerys' expression on her face was a little strange when she saw her today. Do you know what happened to Dany? I think the expression on her face when she saw me today was a little strange. After a long time of separation, especially after experiencing the panic of a disaster, Rhaenys and Viserys simply reminisced about the past, and then asked. Viserys was silent for a moment after hearing his wife's words. He thought of what Daenerys had said not long ago, especially the accusations against Rhaenys, but he did not say these words out loud, but shook his head. I don't know. Really? The female dragon knight with long brown hair frowned slightly when she heard this, but then she didn't think much about it. You should have returned to High Garden before coming to the wall. My sister and the children need you very much. When the long night fell, High Garden was in chaos. If it weren't for Rhaenys stepping forward, who knows how chaotic it would be. But Viserys was not in High Garden when the long night fell, but in King's Landing. He discussed with the important ministers of the Royal Council in King's Landing, and quickly arranged a series of preparations to deal with the long night. For example, the blockade of the city was extended to suppress panic. Ships and caravans entering and leaving the port were strictly checked. All grain outflows from King's Landing were prohibited. All granaries were sealed. Public and private transactions were prohibited to prevent grain prices from soaring. Black markets were cracked down. Grain was distributed on demand, etc. A series of political measures taken by the Valyrian Empire played a very clear role. King's Landing also became the largest city in the world to suppress the chaos of the long night in the shortest time, and Pentos and Andalus also followed such measures to quickly maintain stability. As for other major cities in the empire, Old Town, Seagull Town, etc., some unrest broke out to a greater or lesser extent, and the overseas city-states were even more devastated, because they had never thought of hoarding food in advance, and the institutional restrictions of the free trade city-states led to their lack of a stable external voice. The governor's council is a commercial battlefield, and the governors also have their own ulterior motives. When the long night came, they realized it late, and did not realize what it was at the first time. However, when they realized that this was the long night of 8,000 years ago, they began to desperately purchase all the food and grass on the market. They used their strong financial resources to clear out all the food in the local city market in an instant, which directly led to a surge in food prices on the black market. Even if the long night lasted for decades, these governors would not starve to death. But those who really needed food could not buy food, or could not afford it with money, and could only starve to death. In contrast, the actions taken by the empire can be regarded as swift and effective. Viserys was busy with these things during his time in King's Landing, and then when the things in King's Landing were done, he flew to the wall on a dragon. My question. Viserys sighed, but the brown-haired little queen in front of him blinked slightly. Of course I know you have a lot of things to do, especially when such a disaster occurs. You are the backbone of the entire country, Viserys. You are not just Sister Irian and my husband. More people need you. We will overcome this disaster, right? Rhaenys Targaryen said, and Viserys was silent after hearing this. In fact, he was not sure. Because the enemy of the Long Night was invisible and intangible, and even had no basis, he was a little troubled. He didn't know how to work hard. He just did everything he could. The rest was to leave it to fate or wait for their enemies to make a move and then reveal a flaw. But facing the expectant eyes of Rhaenys, he naturally couldn't tell the truth truthfully, because as Rhaenys said, he was everyone's support, and everyone was watching him. If His Majesty the Emperor was discouraged, the fight with the Long Night would fail before it even began. Therefore, Viserys was silent for a moment, and then he still lived up to Rhaenys' expectations, and nodded. Yeah. When Rhaenys heard his promise, the hanging heart in her heart was immediately put down. Her child was only 3 years old, and she didn't want the Scion hero's memory to be black. I'll go on patrol. Then Rhaenys stood up and spoke. Viserys nodded, and then she turned and left the room. Chapter 785, Arctic Icefield. Thump, thump, thump. Rhaenys' leather boots made a crisp sound as they stepped on the corridor. The heroic little queen, wearing a black and red cloak, disappeared at the end of the corridor like a burning flame. Soon, a loud dragon roar sounded overhead. Rhaenys rode Regal to patrol the entire wall and the north of the wall. The 3 dragon riders of the Targaryen family now took turns riding dragons to patrol to prevent the White Walkers and the army of the dead from suddenly appearing at the foot of the wall and catching them off guard. Now the Imperial army is firmly guarding the wall, having learned the lessons from the last war between humans and White Walkers. Facing enemies like White Walkers, human soldiers who leave the protection of the city walls are lambs to be slaughtered, and architecture is the advantage of humans over White Walkers. White Walkers cannot build siege weapons, so only by defending in fortifications can they do their best to stop the enemy. Now the entire wall is on high alert. More than 30,000 Imperial soldiers are stationed on the 300-mile-long wall, and more than 100,000 troops are gathering in the rear of the Empire, coming from all over the country, including the Reach, Dawn, the Valley, the Westerlands, etc. They are constantly gathering towards the north. When more than 100,000 troops of the Empire gather at the foot of the wall, plus the 8 dragons of the Targaryen family, the wall will become the most indestructible barrier in the human world. If the White Walkers want to break through here by force, they will have to pay a huge price. At the other end of the corridor on the other side, the silver-haired girl in a snow-white dress and a white fur cloak looked at the back of Rhaenys leaving, and her lavender eyes were slightly dim. She now regrets more and more what she said impulsively, but the words spoken are like spilled water, and it is difficult to take them back. Therefore, when Daenerys faces Rhaenys' lovely smile, she feels a little weak in her heart, and can't help avoiding her eyes. Only then did Rhaenys realize that Daenerys had become a little strange. However, while Daenerys was holding the railing and thinking about something, she suddenly felt a shadow appear under her feet. The silver-haired girl was startled and suddenly woke up, but when she looked up, she saw that the person standing in front of her was her beloved brother. Daenerys had lost her parents since she was born. Her father, Aerys II, died before she was born, and her mother, Queen Rhaela, died of dystocia when she gave birth to her. Therefore, for Daenerys, Viserys was everything to her. The thing she feared most was that Viserys would abandon her. Viserys. Then Daenerys hugged the silver-haired young man in front of her tightly, and Viserys also hugged his sister. He could feel that the girl in front of him was hugging his arms very hard, as if she didn't want to let him go. Then Viserys sighed, rubbed her hair slightly and spoke. Dany, can we talk alone? Days passed by, the sun rose from all directions as usual, and Benjen felt that he was about to become one of them, wandering in the army in a daze, without a purpose, and without knowing where to go. But fortunately, Benjen still had a companion. Lyanna remained sober, because of the small black stone that Rhaegar gave her. She would occasionally talk to Benjen, but more often she had to stay away, for fear of attracting the attention of other White Walkers. After all, now in the entire army of the dead, except for the 2 of them, the rest were muddle-headed monsters. Even the more advanced White Walkers were also puppets, at least in Lyanna's opinion. They only acted according to the orders of the Night King, without their own opinions. without their own thoughts, and even more without knowing who they were. If this group of White Walkers knew their identities, they might not choose to fight for the Night King. After all, many of these White Walkers were the ancestors of their Stark family, the kings of the North for generations, and there were many famous people among them. Lionel, where are we now? The thin sunlight above his head penetrated the snow with difficulty, and Benjamin saw the grey-haired woman walking towards him, and hurriedly stood up from the snow and asked, in order to prevent other White Walkers from seeing him and becoming suspicious. After all, the Whites are cannon fodders who are confused, and the White Walkers are the commanders of the cannon fodders. Although the White Walkers do not communicate on weekdays, they at least have the ability to communicate, and a White Walker and a White together all day will definitely make other White Walkers suspicious. Therefore, every time Benjamin and Lionel have a secret date, they will leave a mark in advance to hint each other, and then one of them will quietly leave the team, and the other will follow. Leaving the team is a very common thing in the army of the dead. After all, not all Whites are strong and healthy. There are also many old Whites whose skeletons have been loosened. After a long journey, they can accidentally break their legs. So they can only crawl behind their broken legs to follow the team, while others bump into trees and hurt themselves, or simply get lost. Benjamin certainly would not harm himself. Even though he was now a walking corpse, he also took special care of his body. In the past few years, he had followed the army of the dead and traveled all over the country, experiencing countless battles of all sizes. At the same time, he had also seen the magnificent scenery and various strange monsters on the Arctic ice field. I don't know. However, in response to Benjamin's question, Lionel turned her head left and right. Now the surroundings were all white. Perhaps it was because the sun rarely appeared in the far north, and the wind and snow stopped for a moment, just as they were talking. Then Lionel shook her head very simply. But I think we may be on our way home. According to the direction Lionel identified, they were most likely heading south at this moment, and they had been heading north before, and they didn't know how far they had walked. Really? When Benjamin heard Lionel's words, his heart sank slightly. Does that mean we may soon attack the wall? The grey-haired woman was silent. She also thought of how many humans she had killed when she was just resurrected, and even shot Robert with an arrow to avenge Rika. However, Lionel did not want to kill Robert, perhaps because she knew that he really loved her, but she also knew that Robert would not love only her. Therefore, the crusher slightly shifted at the last moment. Otherwise, with Lionel's archery skills, that arrow would have directly taken Robert's life. Let it be. Chapter 786 Disaster Strikes. It has to be this way. Benjamin's face was slightly sad, and then he nodded and said, although he didn't want to be an enemy of humans, he also didn't want to die. Otherwise he wouldn't have hesitated at the last moment when he assassinated the Night King. The same was true for Lionel. She didn't want to be an enemy of humans, but she didn't want to lose her life for it. I don't know when. Benjamin and Lionel's mentality has undergone some subtle changes. They seem to no longer regard themselves as humans in their hearts, but start to think about problems as dead people. However, the identities of the two people in the human world had long been listed as dead people. Benjamin went to the wall and never returned. At first, his brother still believed that his brother was not dead and would come back sooner or later. However, day after day, year after year, 4 years passed in the blink of an eye, and the horn of the return of the Rangers still did not sound on the wall. Even Edward, who was once the most determined, gradually wavered. He also began to believe that Benjamin really died outside the wall. He thought that Benjamin died for him, because at that time he wanted to go to the wall alone to find Lionel, but Benjamin stopped him and asked him to go instead of Edward. Therefore, for a long time, Edward fell into regret and guilt, and could not extricate himself. On the other hand, Lionel and Benjamin, who had been staying in the white wasteland of the Arctic ice field, also did not know what kind of pain and suffering the human world is in now. The two of them did not even know that the long night had fallen, because the two of them are now at the pole of the whole world. This is a very special place. Because of this, Benjamin didn't know if it was his illusion. He always felt that the sun rose from the east today, and from the north tomorrow, and occasionally from the west and even the south. Benjamin didn't know if it was his illusion, or if he had misjudged the direction, but everything was chaotic here. There were dozens of consecutive days of daytime and dozens of consecutive nights. However, limited by the thin level of knowledge, for Benjamin, there was magic everywhere. He could only attribute it to the fact that they were now in the hometown of the White Walkers, which was a mysterious soil. The human world was completely unaware of this. The sun, which was so precious to them, still rose and set as usual in the ice field. Then Benjamin and Lyanna followed the huge army of the dead and continued to trek towards the south. They thought they would eventually see the Great Wall, but before they saw the Great Wall, they saw some human villages. The people here were dressed in thick animal fur. They were not tall, had wide noses, and had black and straight hair. They shouted in an incomprehensible language and held bows, harpoons, axes and other weapons to resist the attacks of the White Walkers. Who are these people? I haven't been home for a few years. Has the area north of the Great Wall been occupied by these people now? However, Benjamin and Lyanna were all stunned when they saw these unknown races. They had never heard of the language they spoke, and they were also different from the common races on the continent of Westeros, the bloodline left by the ancestors, the Andals, and the Rhoynar. These people seem to be somewhat like the Ibanese. They are all good at using weapons such as harpoons and axes. It seems that these people are good at fishing on the ice in the far north, and can hunt some large beasts, such as white bears, musk oxen, reindeer, etc. In appearance, these people are somewhat similar to the Ibanese, with square teeth, broad shoulders and chests, and their hair is also more vigorous to keep warm. When Benign was in the Night's Watch, he had executed some smugglers who smuggled armor and weapons to the wildlings, including several Ibanese. Benign still has some impression of them. Have we reached Iban now? Benign looked at these primitive tribesmen who fought hard, but it was of no avail. Even though these human warriors were all brave and good at fighting, they still couldn't resist the surging army of death. In just a moment, the entire once prosperous and lively village was completely destroyed. These people who looked like Ibanese also joined the army of death and became corpses. Now the Night King is not here, but the army of death still has a unique voice. The Night King may have entrusted the command to the other party. Benjamin also recognized the other party. He was Theon Stark, the king of the north and the head of the Stark family thousands of years ago. He commanded the northern army to defeat the Andal invader Ragus, conquered the Three Sisters Islands, and attacked the Five Fingers Peninsula. Benjamin had seen the statue of the other party in the crypt of Winterfell, but the other party did not recognize him as his descendant. Theon Stark is now the commander of the entire army of the dead. He can pass orders to all the White Walkers and Whites without speaking. Then the army of the dead flattened the village, and then continued to move south without any rest. And Benjamin and Lyanna realized a very serious problem. This can't be Iban. Because even if Benjamin's academic level is not good, he has received aristocratic education. He knows that Iban is an island, not a continent connected to the White Wasteland. It can't be beyond the wall either. Benjamin's voice was slightly bitter, because he had never seen such a village and such a race beyond the wall. The houses here are extremely peculiar. There are stone houses, wooden houses and even ice houses. Half of the houses are sunken underground, and the doorways are very low. Moreover, the environment here is different from the outside of the Great Wall that Benign is familiar with. It is colder here than outside the Great Wall. Although Benign can no longer feel the cold, he can tell from the clothes and attire of these people. There are floating icebergs on the sea here. In the distance, you can see large floating islands with the help of the sun's rays, but they are actually pieces of floating ice, and there are also tribesmen of the same tribe looking at this side. The sun shines on these floating giant ice blocks, and reflects a brilliant light. We have taken the wrong road. This is the other side of the White Wasteland. An unknown world that no one has recorded. A civilization that no one has recorded. Where are we? Benign's bitter voice was hesitant. This was a more desperate thing than attacking the Great Wall, but the unknown exploration brewing in his chest was constantly stirring. On the other side, the news of the fall of Iban Island has spread all over the world. Koha, Norvus, Bravus, Pentus, King's Landing. Everyone once again fell into panic, especially for those on the other side of the narrow sea, because they were still holding a mentality of watching the excitement, wanting to see the collision between the Empire and the White Walkers, hoping to use the Empire's national strength to stop the White Walkers. Preferably a fight that would result in both sides being defeated, the White Walkers being repelled, and humans regaining light, while the Great Empire disintegrated in the disaster, and people in the future would commemorate it with beautiful poems. However, no one expected that this time the White Walkers did not fight hard with the Valyrian Empire, the most powerful empire in the world today, but chose to take a different approach, and the disaster suddenly fell on their heads. This time it is the turn of the people on the continent of Essos, and all races and city-states have united to overcome the disaster. Chapter 787 Help. In the Sea King's palace in Bravos, all the high-ranking officials of the Bastard of Valyria are gathered here. The Keykeeper of the Iron Bank, the Patriarch of the Ancient Family, the High Priest of the Moonsinger, the Chief Priest of the House of Black and White, and also a faceless man. He wears a hooded robe, half black and half white, with a golden mask on his cheek, and maggots crawling around in it. The House of Black and White was destroyed by dragonfire many years ago, and now there is only a dilapidated ruin on the original site. The people of Bravos regard this as a shame, just like the Titan statue whose head fell into the sea. It is still a headless giant, holding a broken sword, and pointing it straight to the sky, as if it is making a silent roar, just like the hatred that the people of Bravos remember in their hearts. However, the head of the Titan was later salvaged, and is now placed on the side of the Isle of the Gods in the center of Bravos. Although under pressure from the Valyrian Empire, Bravos is still openly looking for the faceless men. Moreover, the House of Black and White was not rebuilt like the Sea King's palace, but the representatives of the faceless men still appeared in the Sea King's palace that was rebuilt now. This almost proves that the faceless men are still in contact with the official Bravos, and the so-called wanted order is just a response to the pressure of the empire. However, with the huge crisis ahead, the Sea King of Bravos can no longer care about these. He found all the people who could be consulted, hoping that everyone could brainstorm and find a way to solve the catastrophe in front of them. When the White Walkers invaded Westeros, Bravos was busy gloating and taking the opportunity to make money from the war, and never thought that the disaster would one day fall before their eyes. Iban has been completely occupied. I don't know how the White Walkers conquered the island, but I heard that someone saw a giant dragon appear over Iban. A patriarch from an ancient family spoke uneasily. His family originated in the Valyrian period and was one of the first families to build Bravos. However, after so many years, the family has experienced countless storms, but this time it really has a strong sense of crisis. Because although they gloated at the beginning, everyone in Westeros saw how much King Robert paid to win this war. Although Bravos wanted to make a fortune in this war, it indirectly created the largest bad debt since the birth of the Iron Bank. They lent millions of gold dragons to King Robert, plus the interest-free loan later, but now all of them have gone down the drain and cannot be returned. Dragon? Could it be that the Emperor of the Empire on the other side of the Narrow Sea is involved in this matter? Is this a conspiracy of the Valyrian Empire? When the dragon was mentioned, some people in the room naturally thought of the former young dragon lord, the towering giant who had grown up now. Viserys had grown up with the support of Bravos, but in the end, Viserys was the one who cut off the head of the Titan and let it sink to the bottom of the sea. Therefore, when Viserys' name was mentioned, the expressions of everyone in the Sea King's palace changed slightly. Even the faceless man who was the representative of the House of Black and White. The faceless man in the black and white robe and a golden mask had no change in his expression, and there was another faceless man beside him with a slight change on his face. He fell to such a point that he could not show his true face, and even could not call his own name. It was really all because of Viserys, the little prince who had helped him get on the carriage, but now the long conference table was full of people. Although Viserys was terrible and all the people of Bravos hated him, it was not right to blame Viserys just because someone saw a dragon. I've heard about it too. A dragon that spewed ice blue flames appeared in the sky above Iban Harbor. It was the main reason for the fall of Iban Island. The person who spoke was a middle-aged man wearing a grey coarse cloth robe and a calm face. He was a keykeeper of the Iron Bank. He was also of noble blood and extraordinary origin. In fact, as a keykeeper, he was definitely one of the earliest families established in Bravos. But it's a bit too hasty to suspect that Viserys was responsible just because a dragon appeared. combined with the characteristic that the White Walkers can control corpses, I have reason to suspect that the White Walkers controlled the corpse of a dragon. The keykeeper of Bravos said. Controlled the body of a dragon? His words sounded much more reliable than the words of the man just now. Now they gathered in the Sea King's palace for a meeting, not to curse Viserys together, but to solve the problem. If they wanted to curse each other, they would have cursed each other countless times behind their backs. However, many people agreed with his words, and some people also raised objections. But there are only a few dragons in the world now. How did the White Walkers control the body of a dragon? Did one of Viserys' dragons die? Some people did not show up at the meeting in the Sea King's palace in Bravos, but they became the protagonists. Everyone. The Sea King of Bravos felt a little headache when he heard the voices below, and then he tapped his ring and said, "Let's not worry about where the body of this dragon came from. Who cares where it came from? The issue we have to discuss now is how to deal with this crisis and protect this great city-state from being ruined in our hands." The Sea King of Bravos said. Now that it can be confirmed that the White Walkers do control a giant dragon, and the people burned to death by this dragon can be directly transformed into whites, does that mean that any impenetrable defense we prepare is useless? The White Walkers only need to ride a giant dragon to our rear and set a fire, and this place will fall. How should we fight this? Everyone, please express your opinions. The words of Bravos Sea King Tormofrega made the scene instantly silent, because the question he raised just hit the point. Just now everyone was thinking about where this dragon came from, and never thought about how to deal with it. But now that they have calmed down, they are thinking about it carefully. How should we fight this? Perhaps, we can ask for help from His Majesty the Emperor. At this time, the man who first accused Viserys held his breath and spoke, and everyone present turned their eyes to look at him. Chapter 788 Human Supreme Conference. But it's easier said than done. Bravos stood on King Robert's side during the civil war in Westeros. The Iron Bank provided King Robert with a large amount of low interest or even interest-free loans, and the person they really trusted was the silver-haired boy who defeated Bravos on the continent of Essos. However, many years have passed, and the boy who was trembling with fear and treading on thin ice has grown into a boy riding a dragon. Now he has created a great empire and become the father of 2 children. However, the kindness between the two has long been dissipated with the things that happened later, and now it seems that only hatred is left. The Bravos people asked Viserys for help. Can it work? Everyone turned to look at Tormofrega, the current king of Bravos, and wanted to see the expression on his face. And Tormofrega also felt the thorniness of the matter. He thought of what Viserys had said to him at the feet of the Titans. At that time, the previous Sea King, Ferragantalion, committed war crimes, and Tormofrega had just won the political struggle with the help of Viserys burning Bravos, and became the next Sea King. We can't rely on ourselves. The Sea King was silent for a while, then spoke. We need to contact other people. Who? Someone asked. Other trading cities. We must unite and ask for help from the Valyrian Empire, and they also have vast lands on the continent of Essos, and they will not watch the trading cities fall one after another. Tormofrega spoke, and everyone present nodded slightly in agreement. Viserys' place of origin is Andalus, Pentus and other places are his foundation, and there is also the newly conquered kingdom of the 3 daughters. The empire will not give up these territories so easily and watch the trading cities fall. So if the situation in Essos becomes serious, he will definitely come to rescue. But if only the Bravos family asks for help from King's Landing, their voices will not be taken seriously. Once the leader of the trading city-states and the center of world trade, Bravos now feels that its voice is insignificant, facing the huge young empire standing beside them, full of expansionist desires. Therefore, the king of Bravos asked to bring everyone along, including Loras, Koha, Norvus, etc. The more people he called, the stronger his voice in the alliance would be in the future. Now, the kingdom of Ivervelen, the forest walker, is fighting against the White Walkers. They use magic in the forest to temporarily slow down the pace of the White Walkers. And they also sent a cry for help to the trading city-states. The messenger of Ivervelen has arrived in Bravos for help, but Bravos has not yet responded to the call for help from the wood people. In that case, it's decided. The King of Bravos decided on this matter after careful consideration. This is a crisis concerning the fate of all mankind. We must unite and hold a supreme meeting of mankind to discuss countermeasures. Gather everyone. The heads of all city-states. Let's go to King's Landing together. Beyond the wall is a vast ghost forest. It is now covered with a layer of white snow, and it is so quiet that even the sound of birds is rare. Densely packed trees stand in a row, most of which are pine and cypress trees that can withstand the severe cold. Now the land of Westeros is shrouded in darkness, with only a few stars looming in the sky. Viserys rode a dragon over the wall, and was looking at the outside of the wall. After leaving the wall, Viserys felt a clear sense of discomfort, as if a pair of eyes opened in the darkness, and were staring at him. However, others did not feel this way, such as when Daenerys and Rhaenys were patrolling, but Viserys still overcame this feeling of discomfort, because he knew that it was not someone watching him secretly, but that he had entered the territory of the ancient alien gods, and the power of death was everywhere. Viserys' sensitivity to divine power far surpassed that of Rhaenys and Daenerys. The alien gods and the old gods came from the same darkness. For some reason, when Viserys came to the outer wall, he suddenly thought of what the three-eyed crow Brynden Rivers had told him. The silver-haired young man frowned slightly, sitting on the dragon's back and looking down, with the sharp wind whistling in his ears. The aliens are not here. Where did they go? Daenerys and Rhaenys had never flown too far, and Viserys' patrol range was farther than the two of them. Then Viserys pressed the dragon's back slightly, and Balerion let out a low roar, and fell from the sky, landing on a snowy mountain. This should be the Frost Fang. Viserys landed on the snowy mountain, jumped off the dragon's back, and looked around. The body of the old gods once sat on this snowy mountain range. It was also the hometown of the children of the forest, such as Leaf and Snow. There was also a bottomless pit suppressed here. According to legend, no child of the forest who entered it could come out alive. Viserys remembered that he had been guarding the body of the old gods. The Night King and his minions surrounded the mountain. It seemed that he would not stop until he killed the old gods. It was at that time that the three-eyed crow Brynden Rivers told him that the old gods and the cold gods had the same origin, and no matter how they hid, they would come to him sooner or later. However, the world is obviously more mysterious than Viserys knew. He once thought that the world only had the main theme of ice and fire. But he didn't expect that there were so many hidden things under these melodies, and the battle between ice and fire was just an appearance, or just a chess piece manipulated by the gods. He wanted to see what the bottomless pit, that was once suppressed by the body of the old gods, looked like now. However, at this moment, a loud dragon roar sounded from the distant horizon. Viserys looked up, and saw a white gold dragon flying from the direction of the wall with the help of the faint starlight. It turned out that Daenerys was a little worried, because she saw Viserys flying to the north for too long, and had not returned, so she flew over on a dragon. "Dany? Why are you here?" Viserys raised his eyebrows slightly, looked at the silver-haired girl who landed on the dragon's back, and then jumped off the dragon's back. Viserys. Daenerys jumped off the dragon's back. Her small leather boots stepped on the thick snow. The biting cold wind blew her silver gold long hair and fur cloak, and her hands were still wearing thick deerskin gloves. She walked slowly on the snow to Viserys' side, held his hand, looked around and asked, "I'm a little worried. Where is this?" If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 789, Untying the Heart Knot. This is the Fang of Frost and Snow. We are approaching the territory of the Thenns. The Thenns are a brutal race, and it is said that they eat human flesh raw. However, no matter how brutal a race is, it could not resist the invasion of the White Walkers. They all fled south in a panic, and eventually died in the north. There is no trace of human activities outside the wall now. It has become a paradise for animals. The term wild man or free man has disappeared in the long river of history, and has become a thing of the past. Most of the wild men in the past have now become extinct like the Thenns. The remaining wild men who have survived the encirclement and suppression of the Southern Noble Army and the cold wind of winter are no longer wild men. Accustomed to the warm and pleasant climate in the south, and accustomed to being able to eat a full meal instead of being full one meal and hungry 3 times, no one wants to return to their homeland. Therefore, these free men who once claimed that they would never bend their knees have also bent their knees and honestly become citizens of the empire, working hard to ensure their own lives. Most of them live in the Vale and the Westerlands, and a few live in the Riverlands. This is because the Vale and the Westerlands are mountainous. At the beginning, many wildlings who escaped from the neck went into the mountains and survived the conquest war and lived to the era of the Valyrian Empire. Thence, Daenerys had indeed never heard of the names of these wildlings because she did not participate in the last war against the White Walkers and the subsequent civil war. At that time, she was left alone in Pentus. This tree is so big. Then Daenerys saw the body of the old god, but now this giant fish beamwood has died. Its branches and leaves have long been withered, losing the golden luster of the past, and the pale trunk has become rotten, as if it will be blown away by the wind. And this fish beamwood is the largest fish beamwood in the world, and the faces painted on its trunk by the children of the forest are also very large, but at this moment, the human faces on the trunk of the fish beamwood seem to be like tears of blood, which makes people look a little chilling. Daenerys even shuddered slightly. What happened to it? Viserys took Daenerys' hand and stood in front of the old god. He looked up at the huge fish beamwood and said in a slightly low voice, "It's dead." Daenerys was a little curious when she heard it. She didn't expect Viserys to recognize a tree. "You recognize it? Who is it?" "It's the old god of the north," Daenerys asked, and Viserys answered calmly, "Old god." But his answer surprised the silver-haired girl. She turned her head and looked at Viserys in disbelief. She didn't expect to hear such a name from Viserys. However, when she saw that the expression on Viserys' face didn't seem to be joking, she covered her mouth. How is this possible? Can the gods die too? Do Leaf, Rob, and more northerners know that their gods are dead? The gods will also die, especially the gods will also die in the cold wind of winter like humans. This reality deeply shocked Daenerys. She had only heard Viserys and more people talk about that war, but she had never imagined what kind of enemies they were facing, and that gods would die in their hands. The gods are also divided into different levels, and there is also the law of the jungle. Daenerys, weak gods will of course die. If you want to be immortal, you can only become stronger, regardless of the cost. Viserys' voice was not too turbulent. Leaf and Snow are what I brought here. She knows that the old gods are dead, but the northerners don't know. It was freezing outside, and it was naturally not a place to talk. Then Daenerys followed Viserys into the cave under the roots of the weirwood tree. This is a hidden cave, and you might miss it if you don't pay attention. However, although the old gods are dead and this place has been conquered by the White Walkers once, it seems that some of the old gods' barriers still remain. Viserys led Daenerys into it, and instantly felt that the temperature around was rising, far less cold than the outside world. If it is a bitter winter outside, the world in the cave is a slightly chilly spring and autumn. The temperature here is different. Is this the power of magic? Daenerys grabbed Viserys' hand and walked into the cave. Viserys picked up a broken piece of firewood from the ground, perhaps the root of a fishbeam tree, and then lit a torch to dispel the darkness and illuminate the world in the cave. In fact, the last time Viserys talked to Daenerys alone, she untied the knot in her heart. What Daenerys was worried about was that Viserys would abandon her and not want her. Viserys was her only and everything. If Viserys really did this, it would trigger the flaws in her character, and she would definitely go crazy. However, the reality is that Viserys did not do this. He did not know how to deal with this relationship, just as Miss Andy guessed. Even though he had lived 2 lives, Viserys felt a little numb. Daenerys grew up under her watch, even from the time she was a baby in swaddling clothes. He could be calm in the face of other women, and he had many lovers, but Daenerys' pure physical relationship was different from his. Therefore, one of his personal habits was to put things aside when he didn't know how to make a decision, and wait until he figured it out later. But he didn't expect that his attitude of putting things aside temporarily would annoy little Dany. However, after the two had a frank exchange not long ago, this problem was solved. Daenerys didn't want to marry anyone except Viserys. First, because of the tradition of the Targaryen family, Daenerys even had a heavier ideological burden than Viserys. And second, with Viserys in front, she already looked down on everyone in the world who dared to marry Daenerys except Viserys. Even if Viserys wanted to marry Daenerys, no one would dare to marry her, for fear that his head would be gone before his wife got married. So when the two of them talked frankly, and Daenerys insisted that she wanted to marry him, Viserys also agreed to marry her as queen in the future. But Daenerys was not like Arianne and Rhaenys, or most women in this world. She showed some of the character of the future queen before she got married, and had some strong possessiveness. She even complained about Arianne and Rhaenys, two sisters who came earlier, and was even more annoyed that Viserys had several lovers. Especially she once witnessed her best friend Margaery in Viserys' bed. Chapter 790 Entering the Cave. The home of the last children of the forest still retains some of its former appearance, but it is obvious that there are still traces of a large number of invaders here. The Night King once led the army of the dead to conquer this place, but no one knows for what purpose. Viserys. If this huge heart tree is the old god, how did the old god die? Viserys held a torch in his hand to illuminate the darkness around him, while Daenerys held her brother's hand tightly and dared not let go, because at this moment there were broken skeletons everywhere under their feet, and she was a little timid. Obviously, it was killed by the White Walkers. Viserys held Daenerys' hand, his pair of lavender eyes slightly reflecting the firelight. He looked around at the dilapidated scene around him, the tangled roots of the weirwood trees, and the skeletons all over the ground. Then the two continued to walk down, and all the colors gradually disappeared, leaving only black soil and white wood. The cave under the body of the old god is like a paradise, with numerous forks and stone chambers, worthy of being the last home of the children of the forest, and most of the bones here are stored. These are not left by invaders. Viserys had seen them when he first came here. There is even a dark river and a small stone bridge in the underground world. After Viserys pulled Daenerys across the stone bridge, there were skeletons with fish beams piercing their bodies on the stone chamber. When Viserys and Daenerys passed by here, these skeletons opened their eyes and made a clacking sound in their mouths, as if they wanted to say something, but they couldn't make a sound. Daenerys was startled again. This place was like the 7 layers of hell, with corpses and strange phenomena everywhere, especially when she knew that the body of the old god was standing above their heads. She felt that the atmosphere was even more weird. Viserys, slow down. She didn't dare to walk behind Viserys, and then got into Viserys' arms. Daenerys was not the only one who felt this uneasiness. This was the second time Viserys came here, but the first fish beam wood in the world died here a few years ago. Viserys also felt that this underground world was full of ominous atmosphere. However, Viserys' purpose was to take a look at the bottomless pit. Yeezy had warned him that no one could come out alive after entering this cave. It was suspected to lead to the underground world, or a monster was waiting for its prey to come to the door with its mouth wide open. Compared with Yeezy's mysterious monster, Viserys was more inclined to believe that this place would lead to the underground world because he had seen an obsidian spearhead here and saw the scene of the children of the forest fighting a fire-breathing worm many years ago. And Viserys also had a faint guess in his heart that the reason why the Night King was struggling to find the traces of the old gods was perhaps to find this cave that could lead to the underground. Is that so? However, when the two came to the deepest part of the cave, in front of the bottomless pit, the burning torch in Viserys' hand had reached the last part. The size of the bottomless pit in front of him was not big, barely enough for one person to pass through, and the depths of the cave were shrouded in darkness, which was darker than asphalt, thicker than tar, and dimmer than crow feathers. The light was like an unwelcome intruder, always flashing and fleeting. He threw the last remaining torch in his hand into it, but the depths of the bottomless pit seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mist, and the light still came out, but it became much dimmer. Then the last torch burned out its afterglow in the cave, and the surroundings soon fell into darkness, and Viserys put his hand on the rock at the entrance of the bottomless pit, with a pair of lavender eyes flickering slightly. Viserys? Daenerys, who was hiding beside him, naturally noticed Viserys' abnormality. The surroundings were pitch black at the moment, and she could only feel at ease hiding beside Viserys. Even the call for Viserion outside seemed to be cut off. But Viserys did not respond to the girl's voice, because at this moment a different picture had appeared in his eyes. He used the power of the old gods to use the rock above the cave as an anchor point to trace back to the past until he returned to the scene before the death of the old gods. At this moment, Viserys was at the entrance of the cave, and Daenerys was no longer by his side because the two were now in different time and space. Now Viserys was surrounded by the sounds of whites, but no white dared to approach here, as if they were avoiding something. However, at this moment, the outside suddenly became quiet. Viserys stood alone at the entrance of the bottomless pit. His eyes moved slightly, and then he raised his head and looked into the distance in the darkness. It was dark and dim here in the depths of the underground, but the eyesight of both people was very good. The Night King, with a broken ice crown on his head, stood quietly not far away and looked at Viserys, and Viserys was also looking at him. This was a look across time and space. The Night King found that the future Viserys was standing here, but after being silent for a long time, he decided to turn a blind eye, because he had no way to stop Viserys from watching, and he also knew that Viserys had no way to cross time and space to stop him. Then the Night King took a half step back and turned his head to look behind him. A white-haired White Walker took the initiative to walk out. This White Walker could not see Viserys, and it did not know why the Night King had been silent here for a long time. Then it walked into the bottomless pit without hesitation. Sure enough, Viserys watched the White Walker walk into the bottomless pit, and there was also a desire in his heart urging him to follow behind the other party and walk in. Anyway, he is just a spirit now, and this is what happened in the past. However, in the end, Viserys still restrained his impulsive desire and chose to endure it. When he turned around, he found that the Night King and other White Walkers had left and disappeared. Don't wait for it to come out. Viserys was slightly stunned when he saw this scene, and then fell into deep thought. Then, I don't know how much time has passed, and Viserys finally came back to his senses in the darkness. He sat on the ground at the edge of the cave and leaned against the nearby wall. The temperature in the cave was still warm. Daenerys was still waiting by his side, but she had fallen asleep in his arms without him knowing when. Chapter 791 Confession. Dany? When Viserys woke up and saw Daenerys who was sleeping in his arms, he was stunned for a moment and then couldn't help laughing. He didn't know how long he had been distracted, but it was obvious that Daenerys couldn't help falling asleep. Looking at the silver-haired girl who was sleeping in his arms, Viserys didn't disturb her, but leaned against the rock wall behind him and closed his eyes slightly. A White Walker entered the bottomless pit that was said to lead to the center of the earth, and the Night King and other White Walkers did not wait here, but left directly. But Viserys waited here all the time. Perhaps this is why he was distracted for a long time, making Daenerys couldn't help falling asleep. However, hard work pays off, and finally Viserys waited for several years and finally waited for the other party to come out of the bottomless pit again. This White Walker with white hair and beard brought out a black stone the size of a human head from the bottomless pit. This stone seemed to absorb all light, the most extreme and pure darkness. Viserys felt that his spiritual body had some fluctuations just by looking at it. Don't look directly at it. He suddenly woke up, and the White Walker was very smart and didn't look at the stone. Viserys followed behind him and watched it slowly move north with a black stone. During this period, Viserys unexpectedly met the lost Benjen, which was beyond his expectation. He had met the Chief Ranger of the Night's Watch. At that time, he fled to Dragonstone with several Night's Watch soldiers who had escaped from the cellar of Winterfell and Tyrion who survived the explosion of the Neck. Later, he met Viserys and conveyed the invitation of the three-eyed raven Brynden Rivers. That's why Viserys went to the north and happened to see the last of the three-eyed raven. However, because the other party has a certain ability to predict, it is unknown whether this is in the other party's calculation. The three-eyed raven wanted to seize Viserys' body, but lost in the battle of spirits. In the end, Viserys swallowed the power of the old gods and made a great leap in strength. Viserys accidentally met the lost Benjen outside the wall. He could see that Benjen was dead and now he was a white. However, Benjen's behavior was beyond his expectations, because according to Viserys' observation, Benjen seemed to still retain his sanity. He took the initiative to follow the White Walker with the black stone and headed north. Therefore, there were two people in the group, one in front and one behind, but in fact there was another Viserys that they could not see. The three of them headed north all the way. Then the next thing was the sacrificial ceremony that Benjen saw later. The White Walker placed the black stone the size of a human head on the altar and then stimulated a blue flame. Benjen became confused. Viserys was concentrating on this ceremony at that time. He smelled the breath of danger from it and instantly felt like he was facing a great enemy. He vaguely felt that there was a greater crisis behind this black stone and this blue flame. Even Viserys did not endure to watch the entire sacrificial ceremony and hurriedly escaped and returned to the real world, which was how he escaped by luck. When he woke up, Daenerys had already fallen asleep in his arms. It seemed that it was already late outside. Since the long night came, the day and night of the whole world disappeared, and people's grasp of time also became different. Viserys held his sister with his eyes slightly closed, feeling the warmth radiating from the girl's young and energetic body, and thinking about what he had just seen. If Viserys was not a fool, he would know that the black stone must be a very important thing. What is it? However, at this moment, Viserys suddenly felt that the girl in his arms twisted her body slightly, as if she changed her posture, and then continued to hold his body and sleep soundly. The silver-haired young man opened his eyes slightly and lowered his head to look at Daenerys. Although the whole cave was dim now, his eyes could still see things in such a dark environment. His sister is really cute. Daenerys pouted when she slept, and her long eyelashes trembled slightly. Viserys felt the warmth in his arms and couldn't help but feel strange emotions in his heart. But when he thought of the way Daenerys looked when she was just born, the baby girl in the swaddling clothes, he held her with trembling hands, and this emotion quickly disappeared without a trace. After an unknown amount of time, Viserys closed his eyes and hugged Daenerys and couldn't help falling into a doze. The girl in his arms moved slightly again, as if she stretched her body. After sleeping for several hours, Daenerys finally woke up. But she couldn't see Viserys' cheek clearly in the dark, but she was sure that this warm embrace belonged to Viserys. She guessed that Viserys was asleep now, so she didn't want to disturb him, but quietly raised her soft lips and kissed him gently on the cheek. Then she saw the pair of lavender eyes that seemed to hide light, looking at her quietly in the dark. "Are you awake?" Daenerys was startled, but then she hugged Viserys more tightly in the dark. "Yeah." Viserys nodded slightly. In fact, with Daenerys beside him, how could he sleep? Then Viserys looked around and said, "Now that you're awake, let's go." Balerion and Viserion's two dragons were still waiting outside, and they had been waiting for most of the day. And they had been away from the wall for so long, and although Viserys and Daenerys were not in any danger with their dragons by their side, they still couldn't help but worry. "I don't want to leave." However, Viserys' words got a different answer from Daenerys. "Viserys, it would be great if we could stay here forever. I don't want a huge empire, and I don't want to be a princess, or even a queen, let alone an empress one day." In fact, Daenerys prefers an ordinary life. Of course, it is not ruled out that she has been a princess for too long and is a little tired of it. If she suddenly becomes a civilian, she may not be able to adapt. Daenerys now calls Viserys by his first name, imitating Rhaenys. I don't know why she suddenly changed to brother at this time. "I want to give you a child." Daenerys suddenly spoke seriously. Then, in the darkness, the girl with silver gold hair turned over and sat on Viserys, then bent down and kissed him. This time, she kissed Viserys' lips and even stuck out her tongue. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. Chapter 792. Magic Potion. On the other side, King's Landing, the capital of the Empire. In a mysterious laboratory in the Imperial Medical School, a mermaid monster covered with scales and smooth skin was lying on the experimental bed, and a chilling roar came out of its mouth. His eyes were scarlet and looked at the face of a boy who was only 6 or 7 years old. The other party's face suddenly turned pale, and the surgical tray in his hand was shaking slightly, but she restrained herself well and finally suppressed her inner fear. Hemostatic forceps. At this moment, an old and calm voice came from above her head. The boy couldn't hear it clearly, but when she saw the old man's gesture, her body trembled, and then she quickly reacted and handed over a small forceps on the plate. The person who spoke was Qyburn, who was expelled from the Citadel for conducting human experiments and later joined the Braves. The Braves were destroyed by Viserys, and Qyburn was appreciated by Viserys, and came to King's Landing to have his own laboratory. The boy next to him was the abandoned child adopted by Qyburn. She was actually a girl, but she wore boys' clothes, and had short hair, making her unrecognizable. Since she was adopted by Qyburn, she has been following this grandfather to learn dark medicine. After a long while, the monster lying on the experimental bed finally had its wound bandaged, and sat up again, with a pair of scalded eyes still staring at the girl. Lord Victorian. Don't scare Xiaomi. Missaria was the girl's name, and Xiaomi was just a short name for her. Qyburn once said that the girl's name was unknown, but it sounded good, so he didn't change her name after adopting her. Qyburn spoke in a hoarse voice, and he stood in front of Victorian and his adopted daughter. The mermaid monster then retracted his gaze, looked at Qyburn with great disgust, and snorted. Anyone who has to have a lot of blood drawn out every once in a while will feel uncomfortable. If it weren't for the order of His Majesty the Emperor, Victorian would have broken the neck of the old man in front of him. However, he didn't dare to do so, because since he was restored to consciousness by Viserys, he could vaguely feel that he seemed to be controlled by the other party. If he really did so, the other party might be able to find him if he escaped into the sea. Then Victorian left Qyburn's laboratory. Of course, he didn't dare to walk openly in the city of King's Landing, but swam to the sea through the sewer system of King's Landing. Victorian now likes life in the sea more and more, and hates living on land. After Victorian left, the kind-hearted deaf-mute girl breathed a sigh of relief. She turned her head and looked at her grandfather gratefully, but Qyburn didn't look at her, but was concentrating on the results of this experiment. Ghost dance grass. This is a strong poison, but Qyburn ground this poisonous grass into powder, extracted some of the branches and leaves in the mixture of powder, and ripped it into the blood, extracted from Victorian's body. Victorian's blood does have a very strong power, which Qyburn has confirmed. He was infected with this curse by a monster. Qyburn can see that this blood contains magical power. However, when this magical power is injected into the human body, most people with weak willpower or weak bodies will immediately twitch and die. Therefore, Qyburn judged that the magical power contained in this blood is too strong, and ordinary people cannot bear this power. Therefore, he began a large-scale experiment, hoping to find something from nature that can be mixed with this blood to slightly suppress the magical power contained in the blood. However, the powder of the ghost dance grass did not react when it was added to Victorian's blood. Qyburn's piercing eyes flickered slightly. Fortunately, he had another test product. Sphinx scorpion tail poison. This is a very precious poison from the east. It is said that it is a venom from the monster Sphinx scorpion tail in the Grey Wasteland. Each drop is worth hundreds of gold dragons. If Qyburn did not enjoy the funding of the imperial finances, he would not be able to afford such a precious poison. However, when Qyburn took out the manticore poison and ripped it into another portion of the blood of the mermaid monster, the blood in the test tube suddenly changed dramatically, as if it was boiling, and bubbles kept rising. Qyburn's eyes suddenly focused slightly. This was the first time, since he started the experiment, that he had something that could produce a mutation with the blood of the mermaid monster. The manticore from the east. Could it be that the mermaids also came from the east? Qyburn's brain was working rapidly, and he couldn't help but think of this possibility. On the other side, the deaf-mute girl Missaria couldn't help but walk over and look at the test tube that was producing a violent reaction, with a curious look in her eyes. Xiaomi. Then Qyburn made a gesture, and Missaria's face suddenly showed an expression of reluctance, but she still bowed slightly and saluted, then turned and left. Qyburn picked up the 2 tubes of blood obtained from the experiment, and walked quickly to the cell under the laboratory. Qyburn's cage. This is the ultimate nightmare of all criminals in King's Landing. The news about this dark dungeon has gradually spread among the prisoners. All prisoners sentenced to death know that if they are interrogated by a group of masked men in black one day, there is almost no chance of coming back alive. However, now, 2 fresh bodies that have just been delivered by the Ministry of Internal Affairs are tied to the bed of the underground cage, and there are 2 men in black waiting outside the door. Mr. Cobbin. Although Cobbin no longer has the title of a bachelor, he doesn't care about it, but the people in the Ministry of Internal Affairs still call him that. Who are these two? Cobbin glanced at the two prisoners inside. One of them is strong and the other is relatively thin. A robber and murderer. The other one. The masked agent turned his head and looked at the thin criminal. Rapist. Cobbin's expression suddenly understood a little. Although he didn't care what kind of people he killed, he could still feel at ease killing some people who deserved to die. Then Miss Aria opened the door of the cage, and Cobbin walked in with 2 tubes of blood. He looked at the 2 people lying on the bed, tied up and covered with their mouths, looking terrified. Finally, after thinking for a moment, he injected the blood of the devil grass into the body of the strong man, and injected another blood mixed with the venom of the lion body manticore into the body of the rapist, then turned around and left the cage, locked the door again, and quietly observed the changes of the 2 people. Chapter 793 Man-Made Monster. Soon, a terrifying sound came from the dimly lit cage, and the shadow projected on the wall was struggling violently. Cobbin narrowed his eyes, while the little girl Miss Aria on the other side closed her eyes in fear, holding the corner of her clothes tightly with both hands. After an unknown amount of time, the cage finally became quiet. Cobbin was silent as he watched the scene in front of him. He turned his head and looked at the girl he adopted. Miss Aria still closed her eyes and dared not look. Cobbin patted her shoulder and turned her around, then pointed to the direction of the door and asked her to go out first. Because even the ruthless Cobbin felt that this scene was not suitable for a girl to see. Perhaps every man would become soft-hearted after having a daughter. Miss Aria did as her grandfather instructed, bowed slightly, and then turned and left the house. However, before she left, she couldn't help but secretly take a look. The deaf-mute girl's heart suddenly jumped, and then she quickly closed the door and hid outside. Now Cobbin stood in front of the cage. The torches in the room were burning quietly. There was a vent above his head. What appeared in front of Cobbin was a very horrifying scene. The cage was full of broken limbs. The sturdy prisoner was torn into pieces by another man, and he was now kneeling on the ground gnawing at the other's body. Some scales had begun to grow on his body, and his eyes turned scarlet. He turned his back to Cobbin, but it was obvious that he had lost his mind. Not everyone has the same strong will as Victarion and Gillian Lannister. Victarion is the commander of the Iron Fleet, and Gillian dared to organize a fleet to explore deep into the ruins of Illyria. He was also not a simple person. Success. Although it's not perfect. Cobbin looked at the cruel scene in front of him. There was no reluctance in his eyes, but full of appreciation. However, the monster created by the blood in Victarion's body was suppressed by the Sphinx poison. It was obvious that the other party did not have a strong body like Victarion, but the difference was not big. It is indeed the era of magic resurgence. His Majesty the Emperor asked him to find the secret of Victarion, but he could not do it, but he successfully created a monster like Victarion. If such a monster can be controlled artificially, it will be a very terrifying force. His Majesty the Emperor and Princess Daenerys flew to the north on dragons, and did not return for a day. The defenders of the wall were talking about it, but fortunately Queen Rhaenys and her dragons were stationed at the wall to stabilize the morale of the army. The dragons are now the heart of the army. Everyone knows that, if you want to win the war between humans and White Walkers, the dragons are the main force that determines the outcome of the war. Then the news from King's Landing finally came. This time it was the Minister of Intelligence Varys. Due to the shortcomings of information transmission in this era, sometimes there would be a long interval between the return of news. It turns out that the White Walkers appeared in Iban. Viserys looked at the information in his hand and fell into deep thought. The story of the coming of the Long Night often appears with the White Walkers, but it was unexpected that the White Walkers did not appear outside the wall, but instead landed on the island of Iban. How did the White Walkers swim over without a boat? Could it be that the White Walkers can now command the dead to build ships? If so, it is indeed not good news, because if these dead people can have such execution power, it means that the civilization gap between them and humans will be wiped out a lot. However, it is worth noting that dragons are also mentioned in the intelligence, which is also not good news, but Viserys did not connect the dragon ridden by the Night King with the Ice Dragon. If the White Walkers appear in Iban, will they not attack the wall? Iban is extremely far away for the people of Westeros, equivalent to reaching the ends of the earth. This island country is located on the Shivering Sea, and is not far away from the legendary Skeleton Mountains. And if the White Walkers want to fight from here to Westeros, it will take at least 1 or 2 years to fight just by walking. What's more, just like the reason why the free trade cities rejected the petition of the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms, there is still a large narrow sea between us. What's the panic? This time, the generals of the empire heard the news and all breathed a sigh of relief. At least the pressure was not so great. We can't let our guard down. The enemy is very cunning. The wall is our best barrier. If we want to protect the people of the empire from the attacks of the White Walkers, we must stop the White Walkers outside the wall. On the other side, Gian Mormont, the commander-in-chief of the Night's Watch, spoke with a serious face. What he said made sense. The wall was the best barrier for humans to stop the White Walkers. If the wall was breached, there would be no more passes like the wall to defend in the rear. The last time they were able to repel the White Walkers in the decisive battle on the banks of the Green Fork was actually pure luck. At that time, the army of the dead that broke through the Iron Islands suddenly appeared behind the coalition forces. Tywin Lannister, the Duke of Casterly Rock, who was stationed in the rear, led his army to retreat suddenly, which directly led to the main force of the coalition forces being attacked from both sides. The entire battle situation had quickly fallen into a desperate situation, and there was even a sign of annihilation. However, His Majesty rode a dragon to the rear of the army of the dead at this time. No one knew what happened, but the White Walkers retreated later, directly saving the lives of more than 100,000 allied soldiers and many nobles of the Seven Kingdoms who participated in the battle. When Gian Mormont said this, he couldn't help but glance at Viserys, who was sitting in the middle with a calm face. He wanted to see whether the expression on Viserys' face was confident or terrified. However, Gian Mormont miscalculated. He didn't see any expression on Viserys' face, but this was not necessarily a bad thing. He was a little uneasy in his heart, but he finally calmed down. If you want to end the long night, repelling the White Walkers is the key. But the Great Wall must not be lost. And Viserys said after a long silence. This is also where he hesitated. In theory, he must fly to Iban Island to help in the battle, but he was worried that the White Walkers would divert the tiger away from the mountain and break through the Great Wall. While he was away, he was worried about leaving Rhaenys and Daenerys to face the Night King, because he had fought this opponent before and knew how cunning he was, not to mention that according to legend, he had a dragon. However, while everyone was discussing, a piece of news suddenly came from outside. The Red Monk Makoro, who had come to King's Landing as an envoy and then went north alone, returned from north of the wall. He claimed that he had important matters to discuss and asked to see His Majesty the Emperor. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. Chapter 794 Methods of Repairing the Great Wall. Your Majesty, the Supreme Emperor of the Valyrian Empire. A 7-foot-tall red-robed man with skin as black as asphalt, white hair and beard, and red flame tattoos on his cheeks and forehead came to the conference room, then bowed slightly and spoke. I found a way to repair the wall. Makoro's opening words shocked everyone in the room, and everyone present, including Viserys, was slightly stunned. Hey, you red-robed monk, what did you say? You found a way to repair the wall. On the other side, Rickard Karstark, the Winter Sun Lord of Karha, who was the Grand Steward of the North, spoke in a rumbling voice. Because of the sudden arrival of the Long Night, Robb Stark, who was originally scheduled to return to Winterfell to take over as the Governor of the North, was temporarily stranded in King's Landing. Although Robb wanted to return to the North to show his talents, his mother Lady Catelyn thought so Robb had no choice but to do it. Therefore, Rickard Karstark is still the Grand Steward of the North. His face was filled with disbelief, because the wall was more than 700 feet and more than 200 meters high, which was not something that could be achieved with existing construction. Therefore, the people in the North regarded the wall as a miracle, and Brandon the Builder was called a god because of this. He was born in the Age of Heroes, and the Stark family was honored because of Brandon, and was called the King of the North. Yes. On the other side, standing in the conference room facing the gazes of many imperial generals, Makoro also stood up slightly and swept his eyes over everyone in the room. Eddard Stark, Rickard Stark, Jim Ormond, Prince Oberyn, the commander of the 2nd Legion of the Empire, Henry Bracken, the representative of the Riverlands, the only heir to the twins, Harry Strickland, the former treasurer of the Golden Company, and now the Earl of Crakehall. The Stormland sent a female general, Countess Brienne of Tarth. She was no shorter than the men present, and even taller. She frowned slightly, and her blue eyes were examining him up and down. Makoro had already known about the generals of the Empire, and none of them could be underestimated. However, his eyes were still fixed on the silver-haired young man in the middle. The other party was wearing a light robe and a crown of Valyrian steel on his head, with a sparkling red gem in the middle. Viserys also had a ring with the Targaryen family emblem on his finger, which was stained with some traces of ink. At this moment, his fingers tapped the table and spoke after a while. How to repair it? He did not ask Makoro where he found the method, because he knew that even if he asked, the other party might not tell the truth. Volantis was the eldest daughter of Valyria, and there were many secrets hidden in it. When Makoro first came to King's Landing, Melisandre warned Viserys not to trust him. This group of fanatical believers of the Red God cult are different from her. They are even crazier and unscrupulous, which can be seen from the fact that the Red God cult later seized control of Koha. And Makoro probably didn't expect Viserys to not ask him where he found these methods, which made him swallow the words he had prepared long ago, and his tone paused slightly. Blackstone. Magic. Dragon flame. Then the big man with flame tattoos all over his bald head spoke 3 words in a deep voice. The combination of Blackstone, magic and dragon flame can rebuild the Blackstone buildings in the glorious civilization of Valyria. And the power of magic and dragon flame contained in these buildings is enough to prevent some terrifying things from passing through the Great Wall. The Valyrians mastered the method of building this kind of Blackstone building, but it is obvious that the history of the Wall of Despair is earlier than the rise of the Valyrians. Brandon Stark, the builder, also has no dragons, but he has Blackstone. This is a kind of Blackstone that appears mysteriously in every corner of the known world. Wherever there are ancient wonders, ancient people from all over the world chose this Blackstone at that time. Perhaps it contains the secret of the times. Before the collapse of the Wall of Despair, no one knew the structure inside. Now, through the fracture and collapse of the Wall of Despair, some traces of Blackstone can be vaguely found. Brandon, the builder, used Blackstone as the cornerstone, and then cast magic and ancient spells to make the wall stand. Strictly speaking, the method provided by Makoro is not a method to rebuild the Wall of Despair, but to fill the gap of the Wall of Despair with the method of the Valyrians. But it is enough to be able to use it. He wanted to use the excuse that he had found this method from beyond the wall, but since Viserys didn't ask, he naturally didn't say it. Because the secrets of Blackstone architecture and the casting of Valyrian steel had been lost with the destruction of Freehold. But in fact, the city-state of Volantis still has a copy. After all, Volantis was the earliest colony of Freehold at that time, and even many Valyrian nobles lived there. Therefore, after the Doomsday, the Great Empire collapsed overnight, and the methods of casting Valyrian steel and building Blackstone architecture were lost from the world. Only Volantis still has a copy. However, perhaps because the technical conditions could not be met, or there were insurmountable obstacles, Volantis, who claimed to be the heir of Valyria, secretly mastered these secrets, but never made them public, and did not use them, but just kept them at the bottom of the warehouse. In recent years, some explorers occasionally claim that they have found a way to make Valyrian steel, etc. But in fact they are all false, and the craftsmen of Koha also claim that they have mastered the technology to recast Valyrian steel. But because Valyrian steel is extremely scarce, few people go to recast it, so it cannot be confirmed. However, Koha has also fallen into the hands of the Red God of Volantis, and the technology to recast Valyrian steel may have also fallen into the hands of Volantis. Therefore, the method that Makoro claimed to have found to repair the Wall of Despair was actually given to him by the High Priest Bonero. As for what purpose the High Priest wants to achieve, this is not something that a red-robed monk like Makoro can know. Blackstone, magic, dragon flame. The meeting room was silent, and many Imperial generals could not understand it, because this was the secret of the Valyrians. But they all saw the thoughtful expression on Viserys' face, the only Valyrian present. What reward do you want to get for offering it? Chapter 795 Group Arrival. I ask for nothing more than the return of the light of God to the earth, your majesty. When Makoro heard Vizira's words, his heart beat violently for a moment, and then he spoke. He knew that, if he had asked for some not so exaggerated conditions, he would most likely be agreed to, but Makoro's mind was only slightly shaken and then stabilized. By the way, I have also prepared a gift for you. Then Makoro called the people outside in, and together with the hands of the holy fire who accompanied him, he held a huge black horn. The curved lines were 8 feet long, and the wide opening could even fit a person's elbow. There were runes of the ancestors inlaid in gold on the horn, but it gradually faded to brown due to its age. This is the Horn of Winter. It is said that Joman, the king beyond the wall, blew the Horn of Winter to awaken the giants underground and end the rule of the Night King. When Mance Rayder blew the Horn of Winter and collapsed the Great Wall, the artifact disappeared without a trace, and no one knew its whereabouts. Viserys had also tried to track down where the Horn of Winter had gone, but he only knew that it had been shipped overseas, and he didn't know who had done it, so he had to give up. But he didn't expect that the Horn of Winter was actually in the hands of the Red God cult. Makoro offered the method of building a black stone building, and also offered the artifact, the Horn of Winter, which could collapse the Wall of Despair, and then left the wall again, and his whereabouts were unknown. After reading the method provided by Makoro, Viserys understood it instantly. The method of the Valyrians to build black stone buildings is indeed not something that others can learn, because the first condition cannot be met, so it naturally disappeared in the long river of history. First, you need the dragon flame of an adult dragon to melt the stubborn stone. Then use the unique magic of the Valyrian nobles. Viserys knew that this unique magic of the Valyrian nobles was the black mist in his body. All Valyrian dragon families seemed to be able to master this magic innately, but after the Doomsday Scourge came, this magic was lost. When Viserys entered the city of Valyria, he once saw a demonized and out of control Dragon King. The other party seemed to be a warning, which made him even think of giving up the black fog magic. However, according to the information gradually obtained later, the black fog magic mastered by the Valyrian nobles is suspected to be related to the underground world, and even the dragons may be close relatives of the fire-breathing worms under the 14 fire peaks of Valyria. They came from the underground world together, so the dragons are close to the people of the dragon family. The collapse of the 14 fire peaks of Valyria and the coming of the Doomsday disaster are also suspected to be related to the underground world. The mysterious underground world, the accompanying black fog, the sudden rise and instant demise of the Valyrians from an ordinary nomadic people all seem to be a mystery. But these mysteries are gradually being solved as Viserys finds more and more evidence to support them. Then time passed in a flash, and the long night still enveloped the earth. Compared with the chaos and wars that were erupting in other parts of the world, the central part of Essos has now turned into a purgatory on earth. While Westeros, the hinterland and capital of the rebuilt Valyrian Empire, still maintains peace and tranquility, and there is not much chaos. Because His Majesty the Emperor is wise and brave, because the top leaders of the Empire have made sufficient preparations for the disaster, and they took quick measures after the disaster, they stabilized people's hearts. In the Blackwater Bay port that has been blocked in King's Landing, Willis Tyrrell, the acting finance minister, was leaning on a cane and looking at the dark sea in the distance. There was a short figure beside him, which was Tyrion Lannister. "So, if we unite, will we survive this disaster?" Tyrion said, standing under the burning torch. "This is the only light in the entire port. Since the long night has come, not only food should be eaten sparingly, but also torches. The food distributed by the Empire can barely keep people from starving to death, and it is impossible to have enough food. Although the granaries in the Reach can harvest 4 times a year, and the granaries are full in the summer, no one will complain about having too much food after the long night falls, because no one knows how long the long night will last. If the long night lasts for a generation as the ancient books say, by then, not to mention the civilians, even the nobles in the castle, will starve to death. It's hard to say, Lord Tyrion, because we are the first people to see the long night fall in 8,000 years, and we don't know how the future will develop. The records in the ancient books may not be accurate." And Willis sighed with his crutches. He grew up in Old Town, so he naturally knew that there were many unreliable places in the history recorded by the ancestors, because the ancestors had no words but only symbols, and the later generations could not understand these symbols and could only rely on guesses and records. Fortunately, this disaster did not befall Westeros. Willis added, yes, fortunately, these monsters didn't come to trouble us again this time. But I heard that they appeared on the other side of the world. Tyrion shrugged his shoulders and said, his small body standing in the torch reflected a long shadow. So these people came to King's Landing for help. Do you think we should agree to their request? Tyrion asked, and Willis on the other side showed a thoughtful expression on his face. In fact, this is not a simple question, because many years ago, when Westeros faced the attack of the White Walkers, the governors and wealthy merchants of these trading cities did not lend a helping hand to the Seven Kingdoms, and most of them just stood by and watched. Now that they have encountered a crisis, they have thought of running to King's Landing to beg for food, and even have a little meaning of forcing the palace. If you speak emotionally, Willis doesn't want to agree at all. He doesn't like to thank profit-seeking businessmen, just like Tywin once said, that war depends on hard steel, rather than soft gold. The traditional nobles of Westeros do not look down on the wealthy businessmen from overseas, because they have no honor and bottom line and act recklessly. Moreover, the noble title in Westeros means thousands of years of family prosperity, which can never be matched by temporary wealth. The backgrounds of the two are different. But if we start from a rational point of view, for the safety of all mankind, destroying the White Walkers as soon as possible may be the only way to end the eternal night. However, before Willis could give his answer, sporadic lights gradually appeared on the sea in the distance. They are coming, Tyrion said, and Willis's expression suddenly froze for a moment, and then he raised his head. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 796, The Fall of Central China. Several warships were heading towards the port of Blackwater Bay on the distant sea. After the long night, the sea was also dim, so one had to be extra careful when sailing, especially when crossing the narrow sea between the two continents. However, although this journey was full of dangers, the princes and governors of these free trade cities, including the Seeking of Bravos, the envoys of the Kingdom of Ivothelon, and even the envoys of Mengelcal who unified the Great Grass Sea, also embarked on the journey without hesitation, and came all the way to King's Landing to ask for help from the Empire. Because the Valyrian Empire is now the only huge empire in the world, and its strength is as strong as the sun. The Golden Dynasty in the east is now in deep trouble, and can't take care of itself. In addition, the long skeleton mountains separate the east and west of the Essos continent as a natural barrier, which is difficult to cross during the day, let alone now that the long night has fallen. Therefore, the Golden Dynasty is unable to save the whole world, and these small countries, city-states, and tribes can only turn their attention to the huge empire in the west. The Valyrian Empire now has tens of millions of people under its rule, and its vast territory covers both sides of the narrow sea of two continents, from the Sunset Sea to the Narrow Sea and even the Summer Sea. Even the distant Summer Islands are said to have been conquered by the Imperial fleet. Therefore, these people pin their hopes on the west, hoping that the Emperor of the Empire who can control the dragon in King's Landing can stand up and turn the tide. Then when the fleets from the east docked at the port one after another, the distinguished guests from all over the world on the ship also got off the ship one after another, and Willis and Tyrion, who were standing at the port to greet the high-level officials of the Empire, came up. Lord Seeking. The first person to get off the ship was Tormo Frege, the Seeking of Bravos. He was riding on a ship of the Bravos Invincible Fleet, painted purple all over, with the flag of the Titan Giant hanging high, symbolizing the most special and powerful city-state in the free trade city-state. The Seeking of Bravos also brought a lot of guards with him, including his chief swordsman, the High Priest of the Moon Singer, the representative of the Faceless Men wearing a golden mask, and a follower with black hair and a hooked nose. Willis Tyrrell was knowledgeable, and had been a tax collector of the Empire. Later, he became the governor of Gulltown and was in charge of his own affairs. Therefore, he naturally knew the symbol of Bravus and could recognize who was the seeking of Bravus from the crowd. Then he walked up with a cane to talk to the other party, and Tyrion followed him, but he was a little absent-minded. His eyes kept scanning the team of the Bravus delegation, as if he was looking for something, but unfortunately, the result disappointed him. He did not see anyone who looked like Jaime. On the ship where other envoys were riding, someone looked at the scene below with some irony. The Imperials really look down on us by sending out a dwarf and a cripple. His words made the other people in the cabin look a little unhappy. A dwarf and a cripple came to greet them, which really made them feel humiliated. However, on the other side, the Dothraki representative under Mengokal was a woman in a black robe. Her robe was very wide and covered her figure. She was wearing a red wooden mask on her face, so her cheeks could not be seen, but her eyes were very bright. At the same time, there were several Dothraki guards around her, responsible for protecting the safety of the sacrifice. She glanced at the person who was speaking, who was the Prince of Harvest, one of the 3 princes of Loras, and then the woman's voice was calm. They are indeed a dwarf and a cripple, but the other party is also the Emperor's personal advisor and the Empire's finance minister. Why don't you think about why a dwarf and a cripple can hold important positions in the Imperial system? The words of the lizard made the face of the Prince of Harvest of Loras quickly blush, and then he couldn't help but fight back. How come I didn't know that the Dothraki had sent out women now? Although the Dothraki guards standing next to Killy didn't understand what they were saying, they could tell from the expressions on their faces that they might not be saying anything nice. Several grassland warriors under Mengokal's command were immediately furious and drew their scimitars. On the other side, Prince Loras's guards also became nervous instantly. It seemed that an internal fight was about to break out. However, Killy stopped the grassland warriors under her command and said a few words in Dothraki. These grassland warriors then put their scimitars back with indignation. Then he made a throat-cutting gesture to the Prince of Loras with a dangerous look. The face of the Prince of Loras's Harvest was also slightly unhappy. He also knew that he had just said the wrong thing. This group of reckless Dothraki might find an opportunity to chop off his head. Moreover, he came to King's Landing not to negotiate on behalf of Loras, but to flee with the fleet. After all, Loras's 3 princes, Harvest, Fisherman, and Street, have gradually become decorations. Loras's real power is now in the hands of the parliament composed of nobles, priests, and merchants. Now the central region of Essos has fallen on a large scale. The woodmen of the kingdom of Ivervelen can only rely on the forest to deal with the White Walkers, but the forest is only a minority, and a vast land has been occupied by the White Walkers. The last proud Tangazan fiend of the crumbling kingdom of Salar only has the last 20,000 people left in Seas, and the kingdom of Oba, which relies on offering grain, gems, and girls to the Dothraki Horse King every year for self-protection, is close to extinction. Most of their people have become a member of the Death Army, madly devouring the rest of their lives. The cold wind of winter has descended on the north of Essos, and the Dothraki have collected the protection fee from the kingdom of Oba, but can't take care of themselves. Because the holy city of Vis Dothrak, had not seen heavy snow for many years, the entire city of the Horse King was covered in silver, and the womb of the world lake was also covered with frost. The Dothraki tribe was terrified, thinking that the gods had sent down a disaster. After all, wizards were born in the Dothraki tribe, and bloodshed broke out in the holy city that should not have been stained with blood many years ago. This was a punishment from heaven. A riot broke out in Vis Dothrak, and it was suppressed again. Then, one of the 3 priests in the tribe, Killy, volunteered to go to the west to find the answer to the problem. Then she caught up with the Trade City State group going to King's Landing for help. So she boarded the ship of the Trade City State and came to King's Landing together. Chapter 797 Remarriage. Willis and Tyrion welcomed the envoys from the continent of Essos, the seeking of Bravus, the governor, the prince and others to the Red Castle, and held a welcome dinner, but not to mention viziers. Even the ministers of the Royal Council were rarely present. Prime Minister Mystoyne, Minister of Intelligence Varys and Earl Ramsay Bolton of Harrenhal did not attend, while Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Craftsmen and others attended the welcome dinner. It is even worth noting that Minister of War Cargo also returned to King's Landing at some point. He led several tribesmen to sit at a table and drink carefreely, while the Dothraki guards standing next to the lizard on the other side frequently cast their eyes over, a little curious. They have also heard that a tribe surrendered to the Empire, and its range of activities is on the Great Plains east of Pentus, guarding the eastern border for the Empire. But these Dothraki people will not feel ashamed, because surrendering to the strong is a normal thing in their eyes, especially when the other party is a dragon-riding cow. The Dothraki are not a united race, often caught in internal strife, and the time of unification in history is very rare, otherwise they would have conquered the world long ago. If two Dothraki meet in an unfamiliar foreign land, they will not be like fellow countrymen meeting each other, tears welling up in their eyes, but they will not be hostile. But there is not too deep affection between the tribesmen, no sense of identity with the same tribe, only the identity of each tribe with the tribe. But even so, compared with the two, their side is indeed a little poor. The guard of the killers had looked at his pitiful outfit, horsehair leggings, painted leather vest, while the other side was wearing animal skin armor, heavy leather boots with embedded metal plates, bronze belts, bows, and arrows on their backs, and the air axe scimitar hanging on his waist was shining, much better than the broken thing in his hand. The Dothraki guard here was a little unbalanced, while on the other side, Tor Morfrega, the seeking of Bravus, asked politely after toasting at the banquet, "Lord Willis, where is his majesty now?" Lord Loris, Lord Norvus, and the red monks of Koha, who were sitting at the same table, all looked over when they heard this, because Viserys did not appear at the banquet, but he was the protagonist of this meeting. "His majesty is still guarding the wall," Willis said. "But we have sent a message to the north, and I believe his majesty will return soon. It seems far from the wall to King's Landing, but it won't take long to get back on a dragon." The seeking of Bravus, who had been worried, was slightly relieved when he heard this and nodded. "That's good." He gathered so many people to come to King's Landing to ask for help, because he was afraid that Viserys would not see him. After all, now that the long night has come, everyone is busy with their own things. Who can take care of whom? It's not that easy to find someone to ask for help. At another table in the banquet hall of the Red Castle, an old man with a cloak and a kind face was eating slowly. A man with black hair and a hooked nose next to him couldn't sit still and kept looking up. Tyrion on the other side noticed him, because the man's eyes frequently fell on him. At the same time, the kind-looking old man Tyrion vaguely remembered that he should be wearing a golden mask. Could this be what he looked like without the mask? However, the black-haired hooked-nosed man's eyes fell on Tyrion again, and then made a gesture, and Tyrion immediately understood. "Oh, sorry, my lords." Tyrion shrugged his shoulders and apologized, then put the wine glass in the hand of a passing maid, and his fingers accidentally brushed across the other's buttocks, causing a white eye, and then walked quickly to a balcony outside the banquet hall of the Red Castle. On the other side, the man calmly spoke a few words to the people around him in Valyrian, then left his seat, and came to the balcony, where Tyrion had just walked in, and then closed the balcony door. "Tyrion, it's me, Jaime." The man with black hair and a hooked nose walked in and said. However, Tyrion did not respond at all, shrugged his shoulders, as if he did not understand what he said, until the man took off the disguise on his face, and revealed his true face. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. Jaime. You know, I have to be careful here." Tyrion turned his head slightly and looked around, and found that no one was paying attention, then asked Jaime to put on his disguise again, and changed back to the black-haired and hooked-nosed appearance just now, and joked. "Actually, I guessed it was you a long time ago. Do you believe it?" "Okay, stop talking nonsense, Tyrion." However, Jaime did not say anything polite when he saw his brother whom he had not seen for many years, because there was someone he wanted to see more. "Where is Cersei?" "I'm here to take Cersei away." Jaime had tried to break into the Red Keep and take Cersei away before, but he was besieged by the Unsullied soldiers and failed. This time he successfully sneaked into the Red Keep, which was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him. He wanted to take Cersei away. However, Tyrion was silent for a moment after hearing what his brother said. He just joked that he hoped his brother would not mention this matter, but Tyrion frowned slightly and was about to say something, which was all seen by Jaime. he immediately felt a bad feeling in his heart. Speak, Tyrion. Where is Cersei? What happened to Cersei? Jaime had a bad premonition in his heart, and his heart kept beating faster. As a faceless man in Bravos on the other side of the narrow sea, he naturally had no way to inquire about the situation of Cersei, who was detained in the Red Keep. After all, so many years have passed, the former princes have become horsemen, and no one cares about the former queen. Is Cersei dead? Jaime was struck by lightning. His mind went blank. However, Tyrion seemed to have seen what his brother was thinking. He frowned and sighed, and spoke with a sad expression. Don't think too much, Jaime. Cersei is not dead. It's just... Tyrion still hesitated. It's just what? Jaime couldn't wait to speak. It's just that Cersei is married. Jaime. Then Tyrion looked at his brother's anxious look, and finally took a deep breath and spoke, and Jaime was stunned when he heard it, and he didn't come back to his senses for a long time. Chapter 798 Governor's Wife. 2 years ago, two people simultaneously asked the Emperor of the Empire to marry the former Queen Cersei. One was Euron Greyjoy, the governor of the Iron Islands. He came to King's Landing for an audience, and when he saw Cersei, he couldn't pull out his eyes and swore to marry her. This was the second time he proposed to the Emperor of the Empire. The other person who proposed to the wife of the former Queen Robert Baratheon was Master Tobho Mortho, the great craftsman of the Empire and the Minister of Craftsmen. As a blacksmith, he was on the Council of the Kings. The best way to integrate into this aristocratic circle was to marry a woman of noble origin. His family had died out, and Cersei, who had no maternal family, became an option. After Viserys allowed Cersei to leave the Red Castle, Tobho Mortho pursued Cersei fiercely. However, after asking Cersei for her own opinion, she finally chose to marry Euron Greyjoy, the governor of the Iron Islands. Although there are only a few thousand people on the Iron Islands after the disaster, Euron is still young and energetic after all, which is better than marrying a bald old man. What's more, Tobho Mortho was born as a blacksmith. Although he was lucky enough to forge a sword for the Emperor, became a noble and even attended the Royal Council, Cersei still looked down on him from the bottom of his heart. Cersei married Euron Greyjoy from the Red Keep 2 years ago, which was also a glorious remarriage. Now the previous dynasty has passed away, and the new dynasty has established a firm foothold, and is in its heyday. If it weren't for a fool, no one would want to use Cersei and Joffrey to rebel, unless he could withstand the attack of 8 dragons, not to mention that Cersei's remarriage meant giving up the identity of the queen of the previous dynasty. Viserys also fulfilled his original promise. Cersei opened the city to surrender, and handed over the capital of the 7 kingdoms intact, and he would spare her 2 children and her own life. Cersei actually asked to let Jaime go, but Viserys did not agree. Although he actually had no hatred for this enemy who killed his father, as a time traveler, he did not regard Aerys, who had only met once, as his father. However, although forgiving the murderer of his father sounds like a good story, it is still controversial, unless Jaime has made some great achievements. However, Viserys has not taken the matter of tracking down Jaime's whereabouts seriously in recent years, which can be regarded as letting him go indirectly. After Cersei remarried Euron, she took away her and Jaime's daughter Myrcella, because she felt that her daughter was still young and needed her care. She also wanted to take Joffrey away, but failed for various reasons, so Joffrey was left in King's Landing. After being abandoned by his biological mother, his character flaws were magnified, and he became what he is now. You Tyrion, what did you just say? Jaime heard his brother's words for a long time, before he reacted and asked back with a blank face. Tyrion closed his eyes slightly in pain, and took a deep breath. He couldn't bear to see his brother like this. Just now, Jaime took off his disguise and revealed his true face, but Tyrion did not see the handsome knight with blonde hair and blue eyes and a smile as sharp as a knife. Tyrion only saw a middle-aged man with Jaime's facial features, but with a dull skin color and a lot of stubble. Jaime seemed to have experienced a lot of vicissitudes over the years, especially his eyes, which were no longer as proud and confident as before, but had become much more mature. But none of the setbacks Jaime had experienced were as thorough as Tyrion's words now. Tyrion's words were like a sharp spear that pierced through the last fragile line of defense in Jaime's heart. Cersei married again. The man with black hair and a hooked nose was actually wearing a mask, Tyrion didn't know if Jaime was crying under the mask, but his eyes still made Tyrion feel a little uncomfortable, so Tyrion took a deep breath again and then spoke. Yes, you heard it right, Jaime. Cersei remarried. Although he didn't want to face Jaime's eyes, there were some things Tyrion felt that he still had to make clear, so he emphasized his tone and repeated it again. Tyrion. Jaime was stunned for a while, then seemed to think of something, like a drowning man grabbing a piece of driftwood, and finally asked, "Did you tell her that I'm still alive?" Jaime hoped that Cersei didn't know he was still alive, so she didn't wait any longer and remarried someone else. However, Tyrion looked at Jaime's sad face, shook his head and ruthlessly shattered his fantasy. I tried to stop her, but failed. I told her that you were still alive, but Cersei locked herself in the room and cried bitterly, and then came out and told me that she was going to marry Euron Greyjoy. And at this point, Tyrion once again seemed to be hesitant to speak, but just paused for a moment, and then continued. Cersei wants me to tell you that you have been running away for 5 years, and she has been waiting for you for 5 years. But she doesn't want to keep washing clothes in the Red Castle. Tyrion's words once again made Jaime silent. He lowered his head slightly, took a deep breath, and then raised his head again. But this time, there was no sadness in his eyes. He seemed to have calmed down and became much calmer. However, at this time, there seemed to be some conflict in the banquet hall on the other side. 2 Dothraki were shouting loudly. It seemed that the guards of the Khilazad were a little unbalanced and denounced the other party for changing the proud tradition of the Dothraki. Therefore, they stepped forward to provoke Kago, and Kago's guards also stood up. The 2 Dothraki were about to start a duel in the banquet hall. But although Jaime had calmed down, he was no longer interested in watching the fun. He just glanced over there, then retracted his gaze, and fell on his brother again. He asked, "Who did Cersei marry?" There were 2 men courting her at the same time. One was the Iron Islands governor, Euron Greyjoy, and the other was Tobho Morthard, the Minister of Crafts. But in the end, Cersei chose to marry the Iron King Euron Greyjoy, and married him to the Iron Islands. Now she has given up her status as queen, and has become the governor's wife of Pike. Tyrion shook his head and said, "I heard that she is pregnant again." Chapter 799 Repairing the Great Wall. At the end of the 299th year of the Egan calendar, the 7th year of the new calendar, the intersection of the centuries. Under the night sky, a deep and loud dragon roar sounded from the sky above King's Landing. Viserys rode a dragon alone from the north, and returned to the capital of the empire. After careful consideration, he still left both Rhaenys and Daenerys at the wall, although he was a little worried that the White Walkers would make a feint to the east and attack the west, and he was worried about his 2 wives going to face the Night King. However, there was no better way now. If only one dragon rider stayed at the wall, it would be more dangerous. It would be better for 2 people to take care of each other. After a heart-to-heart talk, Viserys and Daenerys untied each other's knots. Daenerys put down her worries, and Viserys also walked out of his own ideological dilemma. He promised to marry Daenerys, and returned to the wall after that night in the cave. He held a low-key wedding ceremony under the heart tree, and witnessed by the northern soldiers. Viserys married his 3rd queen in a low-key manner. In the following months, Viserys began to repair the gap in the Great Wall. He adopted the method of building black stone buildings offered by the Red Monk Makoro, and melted the stubborn stone through the dragon flames of the 3 dragons Balerion, Weagle and Viserion. Then he used some special techniques to integrate the black magic he mastered into the melted stubborn stone to turn it into pieces of black stone. Then, with the concerted efforts of tens of thousands of soldiers of the Empire, it took several months to finally fill the gap in the collapsed section of the Wall of Despair. When the last black boulder was transported from the bottom of the Great Wall to the top of the 700-foot-high city by crane, and then put into the last gap by crane and rolling wood, the northern border of the Empire, shrouded in the long night, burst into earth-shaking cheers. Tens of thousands of soldiers and nobles of the Empire raised their arms and shouted. There was no class or barrier. Everyone hugged each other to celebrate and sang praises. The fire in the dark night illuminated the entire sky. This was the most exciting and cheering thing since the long night scourge. The imperial soldiers stationed on the border also smiled, put down their psychological burdens for a short time, and cheered and celebrated. After all, the Great Wall was repaired, and people had a precious sense of security in their hearts. For this era, even the faintest hope is worth singing praises. After the Great Wall of Despair was successfully repaired, Viserys used the skull of the White Crow again, and artificially brought down a heavy rain. However, the rain from the sky turned into snowflakes before it fell to the ground. The fluttering snowflakes fell down and soon wrapped the Great Wall standing tall in the northern border of the empire. The Wall of Despair, which had collapsed, returned to its former appearance overnight. Thick frost formed on the newly repaired wall, and it was even impossible to tell that there was once a huge gap. This is a miracle. The northern soldiers stationed at the wall and the old men of the Night's Watch saw this scene and called it a miracle. They never dreamed that the collapsed wall could be restored to its former appearance. Some people thought it was the work of the old gods of the north, some thought it was the 7 gods who saw the suffering of the world, and some believed in the Red God. But there is also a group that was very small at first, but now they are increasingly seeing that man can conquer nature and are growing. They believe that the empire will surely get out of the darkness and regain the light under the leadership of His Majesty the Emperor. However, when Viserys took the lead in leading 3 dragons and tens of thousands of soldiers to repair the wall in the biting cold wind, there was also a piece of good news. That was the 3rd mistress of the empire, the newly married little princess of His Majesty the Emperor, and now the little Queen Daenerys, who found out she was pregnant while stationed at the wall. Her menarche had come more than a year ago, but in the 2nd month since the last incident, Daenerys found that her menarche had not come. Afterwards, after the judgment of their great uncle, Maester Aemon, Daenerys was pregnant. Good little Dany. The white-haired blind old man smiled from ear to ear. The Targaryen family had just experienced the most life and death crisis. They lost the throne. In the end, the Dragonstone fleet, which was still loyal to the Targaryen family, escorted a 7-year-old prince with his own niece, the daughter of the former crown prince, and a baby sister to another continent. At that time, Maester Aemon even felt desperate, thinking that the family was on the verge of destruction, and he also had the most severe shake in his life for the oath he had always adhered to. But in the end, Maester Aemon still kept his oath. As time passed, the world changed. Perhaps no one could have imagined that the Targaryen family would come out of the most dangerous moment so quickly. They regained the Iron Throne and built an empire greater than Aegon the Conqueror. Moreover, the population of the Targaryen family is recovering rapidly. Viserys, the head of the imperial family of the empire, is still young and is about to give birth to his 3rd child during the period of vigorous development. The population of the family is gradually prospering, and Maester Aemon is naturally happy from the bottom of his heart. Although he has given up his surname and made a sacred oath, the family is the blood in his body, something he can never give up. Even though Maester Aemon is now 101 years old and his time is coming to an end. Not long ago, Viserys and Daenerys went to the wall together and did not return for one night. Then Viserys and Daenerys held a wedding under the heart tree, and the little queen became pregnant the next month. Everyone understood what happened, but they still sent their heartfelt blessings, including Viserys' second wife, Rhaenys Targaryen. Rhaenys had a lively and kind personality. She was the most simple-minded and innocent of Viserys' wives, so she was really happy for Daenerys. And it was at this juncture that Daenerys had been pregnant for 2 or 3 months. Viserys received a letter from King's Landing, and after some thought, he decided to temporarily set off and return to the rear to see what these people wanted to talk about. Since learning that the White Walkers appeared in Iban, Viserys thought about it and decided to fly to the other side of the world to fight the White Walkers. But the news of Daenerys' pregnancy disrupted his plans. Chapter 2 Wait a minute. Chapter 800 Leading Humanity. It was under such circumstances that Viserys rode back to King's Landing on the last day of the old century. Tomorrow will be the 300th year of the Aegon calendar, the 8th year of the new calendar, and the first day of a new century. However, this is not the beginning of a good century. Human civilization is shrouded in darkness, and the future is uncertain and unpredictable. If humans cannot reproduce the glory of their ancestors and defeat the darkness again, they will probably perish in this long night. And it is with this dream of saving the nation that all the leaders or representatives of the camps in the Western world, the seeking of Bravus, Governor Laurus and 3 princes, the monk governor of Novus, the red god priest of Koha, the archon of Atlantis, the kingdom of Salar, the kingdom of Oba, the envoy of Iverville forest walker, the representatives of the Dothraki, the governors and lords of the kingdom of Mia, Lies, and Tarosh, etc. They all came from the continent of Essos across the narrow sea, and gathered in the capital of the rebuilt Valyrian Empire, to hold a supreme meeting to save the world and discuss the future of the human world. This is an important meeting, that will go down in history, and write a bold and colorful chapter. The current situation of King's Landing, which was like a stagnant pool of water, has also become much more lively. The main reason is that there are so many foreigners in King's Landing all of a sudden. The capital garrison maintains order on the streets. The news of such a big battle has been leaked out long ago. People also have great expectations for this meeting. After all, it is everyone's expectation to unite and defeat the darkness. In the face of survival, all the previous contradictions can be temporarily put aside and work together in unity. However, the progress of the negotiations is not very smooth, mainly because the various forces are unclear about the obligations and responsibilities they need to bear. For example, the Wood people of the Kingdom of Iverville, their race and country have reached the final critical moment, because the land occupied by the White Walkers has surrounded their homes, and they can only rely on the woods to barely deal with it. The same is true for the people of Salar in the Kingdom of Salar and the kings and nobles of the Orba Peninsula. The crisis of the country and race is at the last moment, and they have reached the time to fight desperately. But for the distant Volantis, they have not seen the imminent danger. Although they can foresee the consequences, if the situation is not controlled, Volantis is still too far away from the White Walkers, just like Dawn's attitude towards the invasion of the White Walkers in the first war between humans and the White Walkers. As the mistress of the Summer Sea, and one of the overlords on the continent of Essos, the Volantis are only willing to take very small responsibilities, send a small number of troops to participate in the battle, and are unwilling to take out food. In fact, the army can be sent out, but no one is willing to contribute food. After all, if the long night continues, these soldiers will die sooner or later. However, food is really less and less. Many people are planning to dig a cellar to survive the entire long night. Therefore, the responsibilities and obligations of each force cannot be unified, which naturally leads to endless arguments. Bravus is far-sighted. The king of Bravus, the keykeeper of the Iron Bank, etc. can all realize the consequences of not being able to stop the satisfaction of the White Walkers. But people still have selfish desires. If they really ask Bravus to send out the invincible fleet to attack Iban Island from the sea and cut off the retreat of the White Walkers, the Bravus people will shake their heads faster than rattles. However, the problem still needs to be solved. The wooden messenger of the Kingdom of Iverville was full of anger on his face. Finally, he couldn't bear it anymore and stood up and said loudly, "Enough, everyone. While we are arguing here, our enemies are still growing. The wooden people are one of the most miserable countries after the White Walkers landed on Iban Island this time, second only to the Iban people. Iban Island has been destroyed and turned into a hell on earth, and the new Iban people have become the last Iban people. They did not think of uniting to resist the invasion of the White Walkers and regain their homes, but fled to the direction of the Skeleton Mountains, hoping that the world in the east contains the hope of continuing the race. The wooden people did not run away. They chose to fight the invaders to the death. Now the wooden people's territory is surrounded by the White Walkers. They can only rely on magic to deal with them in the woods, and they are in danger of destruction at any time. Therefore, the envoy of the Kingdom of Iverville was naturally a little anxious, and couldn't help but slap the table and speak loudly. However, the words of the wooden envoy did play a part. The throne room of the Red Castle was where the Supreme Conference of Humanity was held. The envoys, governors, and princes of various countries and city-states sat on the chairs below, and they suddenly became quiet. The Iverville people are called forest envoys, because they live in the woods like the children of the forest, and are said to have mastered forest magic. But the wooden people and the children of the forest in Westeros are too similar, but not the same races. They are short, but slightly taller than the children of the forest. They have some wrinkles similar to bark on their arms and cheeks, have green eyes, and wear leaves on their bodies. That's right. While we are arguing here, the White Walkers are still devouring innocent lives to grow themselves. The King of Bravos also calmed down a lot after hearing this, and then turned his head to look at the representatives of many countries and city-states present. All those who were arguing just now calmed down at this moment, but they were still unwilling to give up their own interests and pay a higher price. At this moment, in the throne room of the Red Keep, the fires burning under several stone pillars were emitting light and heat. The unsullied soldiers were guarding this palace, where many historical stories were born with cold faces. The protagonist of this supreme human conference, the young founding emperor of the Valyrian Empire, was sitting on the ferocious throne in this palace. His figure was shaking slightly under the firelight, and the throne under him was emitting a metallic luster. The handsome young man with silver gold hair was wearing a crown of Valyrian steel on his head. The ruby in the middle was emitting warmth. At this moment, a pair of lavender eyes were overlooking the chaos below. If you want to defeat the Long Night, everyone must unite, otherwise it will be a way to death. Viserys spoke. His voice echoed in the huge throne room, and the princes and governors of many countries and city-states below, the wooden messenger of the kingdom of Ivervlon, the seeking of Bravos, etc. The hall was silent in an instant, and no one made a sound. They even couldn't help but take a deep breath and sit up straight. We are the light of all civilized worlds. If we lose, the whole world will be hopeless. Even if we escape to the Summer Islands and survive. On the other side, in a corner not far from Viserys, there was a maester from the academy, who was copying something in a hurry. He couldn't help but feel excited, and didn't miss any words Viserys said, because he knew that he was witnessing the birth of history at this moment. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.